Ladies and gentlemen of Azeroth, welcome back to the channel. I've never been so hyped for a GMA, but also been so terrified at the same time of a GMA of making sure we get off to a decent start here in terms of sound and everything. Guys, thank you so much for being here. This is just truly an unbelievable, moment for all of us here, man. We have Kevin Jordan, one of the original 3 game designers of World of Warcraft, the best game of all time, S tier in its own tax bracket game of all time. He designed nearly all the spells for all the classes in World of Warcraft, and I don't even really know what to say, guys, but we're back with GMA 52. Thank you so much for being here, Kevin. Let's just do a quick catch up and just everybody slash wave at Kevin, guys. Like there he is right there.
What up, guys?
It's real. Oh man, I
Kargoz is on cloud 9 right now.
Yeah, I know.
It's all mine.
Let me start off by.
Okay, go for it.
There we go. All right, let me start off by saying, first of all, Kevin, thank you so much for everything, for being here, for what you did to this game, guys. I am absolutely like I lost for words, which was first time for everything. But I mean, the fact that we're here, talking about this game on episode 52 about a game that we all love and care about, and we have Kevin Jordan here to talk about it. It's just what a beautiful thing. Thank you, Kevin, for coming out. Thank you, Dunedain, for setting this up. You guys go ahead. I'm just so happy right now.
Wait, I thought there was an intro to this.
Oh yeah. You ready? Are you ready? Let's do it. Here we go, boys. Okay, so Kevin, let me. Did you help created Power Fort, right?
No. What's the intro with this channel? Let's hear some Good Morning Azeroth.
Okay, let's do it. So I'm gonna put a power word Fort on everyone. Here we go. We go. Good morning, Azeroth, number 52, baby. Kevin Jordan. Let's go.
Love to see it.
Very nice.
I mean, I almost don't even want to I don't even care what happened with Defcamp or Dunedain or Melderon. We usually do a little catch up with everybody and how they've been doing. I kind of don't care about you guys. Like, I mean, could you give us a little one-liner, Melderon, man? Yeah, it looks like you're bald, I'm bald. We both shaved our heads.
Yeah, I shaved our heads for this. You know what I mean?
I forgot.
Yeah, but yeah, everything's great. What's been new? Been tanking on a warrior. Doing some 20-man tanking. And I'm sure we'll have some questions about warriors coming up at some point. But I've been really enjoying that. Other than that, just been playing, raiding. AQ40 is amazing. We're having a good time.
Yeah, same here. Nothing important really. We clear AQ now in one night. It's not. Actually, just skip this and let's get to the point.
That's what I'm saying. Right? Before we begin, though, can we get some absolute berserk chat spam for Dunedain by for some reason hooking this, putting this together, reaching? I don't know how this happened, but Dunedain though.
Neither do I, man.
You want me to tell you how it happened? He just asked.
Damn.
Amen.
The worst anything can happen in life is that it turns out the way you didn't want it to happen. Well, you know what I mean?
Right.
But there's always a chance that it will. How dare you?
Yeah. Thank you,
All right. Can I get a word in edgewise here? I got something for chat.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Stranglethorn, Vietnam.
That's my new sub emote noise or whatever. That's it.
There it is. Just have Kevin screen that. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. It's almost the type of thing that I think each one of us has an initial, if you could, humor us, Kevin, just a little paragraph of what we'd want to say to somebody who created, the best game of all time, a game that's been so impactful and integral to just who we are as humans. Not you have to take it too far, but I mean that's a true statement. I don't even want to know how much slash played I have overall, in WoW in general. But before we get into that, do you have any initial words for anybody, or how are you?
Yeah, how you guys doing? I hear that a lot, and I honestly never get tired of it. I was saying, in our kind of warm up for the show, but this game has affected me a ton as well. I know the depth of connection a lot of you guys have, because I worked on this game and played it for a huge portion of my life, and when I wasn't thinking about it and when I wasn't working on it and playing it, I was definitely thinking about it. So it was a life consumer for me as well. And it's it fills me with joy to know there's so many people out there that have gotten so much joy out of it. And yeah, so I never get tired of hearing the stories, and I definitely understand, I'm not, I'm a game designer, sure, but I'm also just a huge nerd. I'm a huge gamer nerd, right? So I go through all the same things you guys go through when you find a game that you just love and really connect with. So yeah, I love to hear it. Love to share in that, geekdom.
I'm glad. Sometimes I feel like all that, maybe they don't want to hear because they've heard it so many times, but like I know I can share this with everyone else because everyone knows my story a little bit. But WoW literally helped save my life. Like I had issues with addiction in my past and all that, and like WoW was always there for me when I would get out of rehab, whatever, get clean, come back, play WoW, and like WoW helped me grow as a person. I never thought I would be the kind of person that'd be able to stream. Never thought I'd be the person that'd be able to talk like on in front of people like this. And the socialization that WoW taught me, and coming out of my shell, and being able to explore who I am and like what I like about myself. This game allowed me to do that.
Right.
And it means so much more to me than just a game. So I can't thank you enough, Kevin.
You hear that, kids? If you're going to get addicted to anything, World of Warcraft.
Yeah, that's the safe bet.
Yes.
So I hear you mention you're like a huge game fan yourself and like huge VR. I think that's, without bashing too much on Blizzard nowadays, but I think that's what made Classic. That's a secret to Vanilla WoW, right? It's designed by people who just love playing the game as we do. And I wonder, as a first question, maybe, how do you feel about how Classic is, how they went with Classic? Did they make the right choices, in your opinion, like going with the 1.12 patch and stuff like that?
Overall, I would have to say I think it's a huge success, right? Like, yes, there are issues. Yes, not everything is as all of us would have wanted. But it's like any good relationship, right? Like you tolerate the stuff that annoys the crap out of you because there's still 95 to 98% of it that's just like a dream come true, right? So yeah, those little things annoy you and they get on your nerves. And when you're in a bad mood, it seems like it's even worse than it is. But at the end of the day, we're back playing a game we fell in love with, and we'd still be, a lot of us would still be on private servers if this thing weren't around, right? So no bash on private servers; they're amazing at times, but a lot of us just wanted as close to the real thing as we could get, and we got it. And it's not perfect, but it's still. It's still taking up our time, and we're happy to be here playing it. So,
yeah, no game is perfect. And I think, when you consider the fact that we had 15 years to sandbox this thing in different ways and try to understand it at many deeper levels, it's kind of no surprise that, metas exist, right? And I think we were talking about that a little bit before the call, but that's part of the process, right? And that's something that you kind of envisioned when you made this game, is that metas would develop.
Oh yeah, for sure. That is the process. I talk a lot about this on my channel when it comes to rotations. Talk about like DPS rotations or whatever it is. I think a lot of modern development designs those intentionally, and rather than how I approached it back in the day, which is just to give you a bunch of cool abilities, and then you define the rotation based on your expertise in the game, right? So the difference between the way I did it and the way a lot of games do it nowadays is they've removed that process, right? Because they've designed for you the way the buttons should be pushed. And once you figure that out, then you just kind of do what they intended, right? But they've taken that whole process of fun of, every once in a while you get to, outsmart them and play in a better way than they were expecting, but it's a lot more rare. And that process is so huge when it comes to engaging with the game, right? Because, your creativity, your personality, your expertise, your math skills, whatever it takes, right? All the things that go into defining the meta is such a huge part of gaming for so many.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is how the meta has evolved over time, how the meta has, this game, is, like we all say, it's a 15, 16-year-old game, but still there's something found new almost every day. in terms of whether, is this item going to be best? Is this, as a priest, I'm looking at like, okay, for certain fights, I like using my tier 2 AP's bonus and getting the trinket from ZG, and like all these different things where, you formulate for this boss, this is going to be the best for this boss. And people are asking in chat, like, this game, 15 years old, still stands the test of time. People rather play this game than retail WoW because of the feeling of just immersion and the feeling of getting something out of the game that I can't get out of retail for me personally. Even though, yes, there's challenging being a healer, this, that, and the other, but the amount of just pure passion that was put in this just shows, it bleeds out when you look at the class design and when you look at the game as a whole. And I think for me, I get a huge kick out of the little things, like for example, like priests having certain different abilities for each race and things like that. And I think, and you look at like a game like, say, D&D, and you feel the elements that out of D&D into classic WoW. I don't feel that as much with retail. I feel that so much more with classic, and I think that is what makes the difference to me. Is I can feel myself playing this game forever.
Right. Stop! I'm blushing. Oof.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think you guys hit the nail on the head. What Defcamp just said. I think class identity is so well defined in classic versus any other iteration of the game. Do you guys agree? Like, every class feels so unique.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Kargoz.
Well, I was gonna say, man, like, it's the type of thing. My brain, like, there's so many things racing through my head right now, man. Like, just to give you my one little paragraph, I played this game since the winter break. I was in middle school, 2004, and ever since there, it's really the only game that had that instant connection. Like, maybe there was one or two other games that come to mind, like maybe Halo or something like that, but it was a game that felt too good. I remember I went over to a family friend's house, and you know how you do these play dates when you're kids, and the parents get together and drink wine and stuff. But like you're hanging out with a much older. He doesn't really like you. He doesn't really like you. He's just tolerating you. I'm there looking over his shoulder, watching him in the Barrens on his troll, and like I just knew in that moment, like, dude, this game is too good. It's too good. It's like overpowered. I had to go get the game, then turn all my friends to it, and I've just never seen a game it's still teaching us stuff. There's still stuff I learned. I learned about the Ventrico supplies from fishing the other day. So many years later, and even when you get all these big brains and the internet and all these tools, it's almost like kind of assaulting the game. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I just mean there's so much technology that we can apply towards the game to try to break it, but it doesn't break. It doesn't break, really. It still stands its own, even with all of this insane spreadsheets and theory crafting. Somehow this game that was made 15 years ago plus doesn't break. It doesn't just totally crumble under the weight of all that technology. And
all right, Kargoz, I have to call you out here. I'm sorry. You didn't watch him running in the Barrens and decide that it was the best game ever. You looked down in the corner of his screen and you saw Barrens chat, and that's when you decided this is the best game ever.
Yep.
So I felt like pretty disingenuous for you to leave out that very.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. That was the perfect medium to channel my edgy little 14-year-old self.
Yeah, that's
right. Throw in those Chuck Norris jokes and all that. But
I think the exact line was, "Where's Mancrick's wife at my house?"
Just to build on what you said, though, Melderon, like, there's so many things, because we played this game for so long, and there's these stretches where you're just leveling solo. First of all, this game has been like therapy a lot of the time. To me, just getting in the zones, I play with the ambience and the music cranked up. Like, if I had to pick one aspect of value add this game does for me, it's just kind of that therapeutic, chill, amazing, feeling I get when I play it. And to build off what you said, Melderon, every class not only has a good class identity and fantasy, and the skills feel different and unique and flavorful, but they have their own like color palettes associated with them. All the architecture of the races have their own color palettes, their own noises, their own. And I think to myself, like, over years and years of playing this game, how much of this was premeditated? How much of this was black voodoo magic that they were, how much of this was just sheer unbelievable, like, RNG into making this world? And now, we have this opportunity to get some information on the, it's just insane.
It's so funny, actually, because it's so nice to hear, because I talk about, in a lot of my interviews and whatnot, I talk about thematics, right, of a class, which thematics are huge when it comes to creating that class identity. But but I've had that word weaponized against me, right? Thematics, right? Because they'll throw that in my face every time a class isn't as powerful as another class, right? Which is what all people care about, right?
Yeah.
And so it's so nice to hear the other side of like appreciating the identity that goes into it, and essentially the thematics that I always strived for to be just as important as, you know, the underlying numbers. But again, offering an experience that is different. You know, there are 9 classes. I wanted to offer 9 different types of experiences. I was totally okay with, you know, the idea that you hate some classes and you love other classes. And to me, that was a sign that things were going well, because that meant I made a very diverse, you know, set of experiences. So as long as, you know, the entire community didn't hate one class, right, then I was onto something. And it was pretty evenly split, as you guys remember from the early days. You know, there were some low pops on some things, but there was a pretty wide open. Go ahead.
I was saying, why can't games do that today? Why is it that everything has to be balanced? Everything has to be
right.
And I know so many, you know, the reasons are people complain and this, that, and the other. But, you know, I myself, right, like there's classes that I love. I gotta say, like every class has its own feature that is just so distinct. You know, look at druids. Like they might not be the best healers, but look how amazing they are in PvP. Look how amazing flag carriers they are. You know, the only class that can battle res in Classic WoW. The only, you know, I don't know what I would do without Innervate half the time, right? As a priest. So it's like,
right.
You know, it's like all these things that are so unique to each class just screams class identity. It screams, you know, like when I play a priest and I, you know, feel so much different than a shaman or a druid. And, you know, and paladins are, you know, Dunedain. I know you can probably talk hours about paladins, but they're so unique in their class design. And
I have a couple of questions, but that's for later.
Yeah,
Paladin is like one of the most unique classes in any game, I would say.
I think so too.
The seal and judgment system. But let's say that for later.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, like, why do you think it led to such homogenization in the classes over time?
Unfortunately, it's just it's a designer trap that you can fall into. It's also something you'll see, like, you know, I talk a lot on my channel about how very good players, or, you know, the sort of the pro level players, tend to make very poor game designers. There are exceptions, of course, but when you take a pro gamer and try to turn him into a game designer, he thinks very one-dimensionally about winning and about achieving and things like that. And those are the qualities that make him a pro player and make him very good at winning, right? But game design is about more than, you know, for most games, right? Especially a game like WoW, it's about a lot more than just feeding that appetite for winning. And so you have to step outside that mindset, right? And think about all the different kinds of players that you're trying to attract to the game, and all the different approaches people have to getting joy out of the game. It's and some can make the transition, but some struggle with it. And within dev teams and communities, we tend to see a person who's really good at a game, and they're usually very intelligent people, and they're occasionally very well spoken, very organized thinkers, and things like that. Things that you would think would translate well into a job like game design, and we toss them in. But yeah, there's a lot more to it. So it's a trap that designers fall into. And it's also, you know, like, we tend to hire the people that are going to most readily fall into that trap. The other side of it, the trap, is just, you know, this is what players want. Players want, they want you to cut away all the fat, you know, of a class, right? They want you to cut away all the things that don't help them achieve whatever it is their goals are, because they see it as useless or trash or whatever. But if you get into that mindset and you stay in it too long, you end up with this game that's extremely lean and, you know, let's say perfectly balanced, but there's no fun in that, right? There's no experimentation. There's no what ifs. There's no, you know, mad science within that experience. It's just, yeah, I rule, you know, and that's exactly how they designed it. So here we are, right? And it ends up being a lot less collaborative, right? Like, good games are a collaboration between game designers and players to achieve this joyful state of playing this entertaining thing, right? So
Do you feel like
we've lost
whole
that
classic hype and stuff is getting us more into the direction again of like the old game design? Because classic is kind of successful, right?
Yeah, that's certainly the hope, and I think it has sent a strong message. I think it was sending a strong message before it even came out, just how excited everyone was for it. You know, I was pretty blown away when I heard about this whole project moving forward and the struggles that so many of you endured just to get the green light on it, right? So that's a very strong message, and to anyone in the industry that thinks that there isn't a market for this type of game, that there isn't a successful monetization method within this, within this market, is crazy. Because I mean, just look at Classic, and there's multiple millions of people that want to pay $15 a month to play a game like this, right? And that adds up to a lot of money. So as long as you don't screw it up with microtransactions and, nickel and diming and, right.
Absolutely.
Pay to win and all that other nonsense. Right. There's a market for it. And the message is loud and clear. So hopefully it's just up to somebody to listen, take notice, and, take a risk. Right. Because MMOs at the end of the day are a risky proposition. They take a lot of money, huge teams, got to have a lot of talent, got to do a lot of things right. But, I think there's a market for it. I believe in that market. I'm a part of that market. So,
yeah. And I think like when I think about the way classes were designed, I think about tabletop games, and I think to myself, like, if you're going to roll a shaman or a paladin, let's say, which is kind of like a cleric, from Jump Street, you're not going to do as much damage as a fighter, right? Or a thief or something. And I think that's okay, and I'm kind of surprised why people don't kind of see that, like, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but I would assume that a lot of your class design ideals came from tabletop games.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny too that you threw Thief in there, right? Because Thief was the worst damage. Thief is a non-combat class in D&D, right?
So yeah, it's like Pathfinder. So yeah, so I'm probably Yeah.
But over time, it got transformed into this DPS, this dual wielding from behind DPS class, right? But the Thief was the guy who was, doing all the adventuring when you guys were back in town, repairing your armor and buying healing potions, right? Like you had two things you had to do. And the Thief was like, well, I'm sneaking into every second story window I can. And I'm, talking to somebody and, sneaking around and lockpicking, right? Like, he was the guy that was having all the fun, right? And then when combat came, it's like I do one sneak attack and then I'm done, one backstab and I'm done. So it's so funny that computer games have transformed the idea of the Thief into like this high DPS, character when, and it was some of the things we tried to put back into the game in WoW from like EverQuest, for example. We had ideas, obviously stealth was a big deal. And we tried to put in lock picking, and we had an idea for disguise at one point. We wanted him to do things like, sort of non-combat-ish, very roguelike, old school thief-like. Unfortunately, that's, when players think about success in MMOs today, it's less about role-playing, unfortunately, and more about progression, right?
Yes,
right. And that's totally fine. Progression is great, but I want games to be more ambitious than that. I want them to strive for not just a progression oriented experience, but an RPG experience at the same time. So, and it's a tough blend.
You hit the nail on the head, because when I asked that question, you really opened my eyes to see, at the end game, you have these people who, push the end game content. But like when I look at balancing, and Melderon and I and Kargoz, I think we all agree with this. You look at these people who are trying to balance the game in a PvE perspective, right? But the way that I look at the game now is I try to look at the balancing, taking consideration the leveling process, which is a huge part of the game, PvP and PvE. And when you take in all three of those aspects, the game is actually, the classes are actually really balanced, right? Because you might have some classes that are amazing levelers, like hunters and druids. Druids might not be some of the best PvE content, right? When it comes to healing or tanking, but they excel highly at leveling. They excel highly at PvP, and I think one thing where we forgot is like so many people just look at PvE and say, okay, every class should be doing the same amount of DPS. They should be doing the, be the best tanks. Everyone should be healing on the same part, but
Right.
what it comes down to is the classes are so balanced. If you think about the game as a whole, leveling, PvP, PvE, what you want out of these classes, what you want out of the characters. And I think that's where you guys really nailed it. And people forget that. They forget that a lot because everyone wants to do, the top amount of DPS. Everyone wants to do the top amount of healing, but that's not what it's about. It's about the experience.
The fourth aspect, real quick, is utility. I think it's utility, leveling, damage. And that's the thing people forget too, is utility as well.
So I'm really...
And they also...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
They also don't realize that what they're asking for is the end times, right? Like if everything's perfectly balanced, then no choice matters, right? And people don't really want that. You don't really want to feel like you're just like everyone else, when it comes right down to it. You're cookie cutter next to everyone else. You want moments to shine. You want moments to flex. And in order to have those, you have to have moments where you can't flex, where you have to sort of take it on the chin and get carried a little bit. But what helps get you through those times is that utility, those individual class mechanics that everyone's excited to have you along for, and also just the play style. If you're having fun doing your thing, and the way you feel about your class and the way you project to others about your class, which is in a lot of ways a projection of your personality, then you can get through some of those dark times in raids where you're not, you're doing 2% less DPS or 5% less DPS, So it's important. But people, you don't really want perfect balance. Perfect balance is a very boring state.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask you, Kevin, I'm just super curious to get your side of the story here. Like, as being one of the chief architects and creators of the original universe and amazing game, what is your take on the narrative of World of Warcraft as it unfolded? Like, I don't know exactly how you feel about the current state of WoW versus where we are now versus like how you see, like, did it go downhill? Did it go uphill at points? Just really curious, like, just your high level thoughts on the story of World of Warcraft, the game as it stands.
So there's no question it's declined, right? Like there's no question. This is shown in the subs and the way people react to it and the amount of trust people have. You can see it reflected in a lot of different ways. This whole classic thing is a really mixed bag for me. I'm super excited that it's back, and I'm super excited that people wanted to play it so much, right? Like that's really heartwarming to me, that people appreciated, the game I worked on so much that they want to bring it back 15 years later and it can be successful again in the current environment. That's very, satisfying, right? But it's also saddening, right? Because it tells me that the game hasn't reached its potential, right? Like I imagined a world where 15 years later, the game would continue to be growing and even more awesome and building on the foundations of what it was to continue growing and evolving, right? And not just WoW, but other games in the industry would also be doing this, right? There'd be other contenders pushing the envelope and trying to, actually dethrone WoW, and it would be a competitive space, right? But I think a lot of us can agree that the genre is kind of lackluster at the moment, right? Like the fact that a classic WoW has to come back and take charge again, right, is telling that, the competitive scene isn't really there, right? So that's also kind of sad. And I accept that, once I left the company, it's definitely not my game anymore. And they have every right, the people that are still there that are working on it to do what they want with it. But I'm still kind of sad that they didn't build on some of the philosophies. And some of that's down to me because I didn't write this stuff down, right? It's okay that they took it a different direction and they experimented and tried to do some things, but I'm sad that it didn't work out the way a lot of us would have hoped.
Is there anything that jumps out to you? You mentioned these philosophies that they didn't build on. Was there anything like that sticks out feature-wise, or maybe something they did during an expansion that sticks out as like a sore point or something that was a defining moment for the game?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things, and I think you guys will see this in hindsight and probably already know it, but I have to ask you guys, and just go around real quick and tell me, what is your favorite content in the game? What's the not your favorite? Sorry, what's the best content in the game? Defcamp, what's the best content in the game?
For me, it's
In classic,
classic, vanilla.
Yeah, for me, it's playing with other people, whether it's dungeon, raiding, the social, anything that involves social interaction. So dungeons, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, Kargoz, what's the best content in the game?
For me, and it took me a while I was embarrassed to say this for a while, and it took me a while, being a leveling Andy or whatever, but I really enjoy the leveling in this game, the carrot on a stick that comes from that beautiful purple stuff that you accumulate with each kill and each quest, being able to immerse yourself into the zones and level different classes and mess with the talents while leveling. It is the leveling final answer. Okay, awesome. Dunedain?
If I have to pick one thing, it's probably just being in beautiful zones, listening to the music and hanging around in those zones, which is why I like playing Alliance in the first place, because I think their zones are better designed.
Right. Okay. Melderon?
As a GM, I have to say that I have this like inner like kind of need to see my raid progress and do better. I really enjoy the raiding content. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So those are all great answers, but you're all wrong. I hate to tell you. All right, so here's the answer as I see it. You guys are the greatest content, right? The people playing the game are the greatest content. All the other stuff is just there to trick you to show up and start acting like yourselves, being fools, being funny, being hardcore achievers, and bouncing off each other, right? That's the greatest content, right? And so I think that's the thing that the modern dev team has forgotten, right? Because they've zeroed in on the content itself rather than remembering that it's everybody showing up, being in the same space, being each other, forming communities, socializing, right? So you were close, Defcamp.
Yeah, I was close.
But it's really just like you running around being yourselves, interacting with each other, and creating the Leroy Jenkins, the more dots, right? The funeral PvP event, right? Like, right? Like these are the things that matter. These are the things that create stories that we remember, forever, right? So many of us have killed bosses. So many of us have, progressed through the raid tiers and at lightning speed or, slow but steady or whatever it is. But that's not the thing that we remember as a community for this game, right? The things we remember are all of those amazing moments that stand out, that are just legendary memories, right? So, and all of that comes from you guys, right? None of that is scripted. All right, the Leroy one was a little scripted, but scripted by people. So you know what I'm saying? So that's, I think, one of the key things that has been lost today is that there's not enough emphasis on creating a platform or an environment for those things to happen sort of naturally, right? Put people together, have them collide, have them compete in the same space over the same resources, right? So when you talk about things like personal loot, right? That's a thing players want so they don't have to compete, but we've lost all of those moments where somebody ninja looted in a raid, right? Which are some of the most legendary memories, right?
Yeah.
Those are gone now, right? So again, trying to make the game better, but destroying the kind of true purpose of the game in the first place and the genre in the first place, which is to, put people together so that they could create these moments, right? Things like Dungeon Finder, like those things eliminate that consistent social collision with the same people, right? That now we're forming relationships, some of them good, some of them bad, right? But all memorable, potentially. Things like flying mounts, the collision has been, destroyed because everyone's flying past each other in a 3D space, right? You're not running along the ground, interacting with monsters and helping each other or competing with each other for nodes or, any of those things, right? So those are all the things that are really kind of key to what makes an MMO and the genre itself really unique and special from other games. And it all comes down to the way you guys run around and behave with each other. So it has very little to do with the content itself. So that's what's been forgotten over the years.
It's the biggest big true I have ever heard. It's like, and it's so simple, and it's like we know it because we look back, and I look like, just like you said, the loot things, like being able to like be the loot, like being the loot council and saying, okay, rewarding this guy for what he did because he shows up every week to raid, he brings all these consumables, he brings all this money, and like he remembers that, right? It's that memory that you create, rewarding people for what they're doing, having those choices in the game. And I always was such an advocate for this. It's like, leave the choices in the players' hands. When you take the choices out of our hands, you take the fun out of the game, and it's such a fundamental truth.
And that's why we never formalized like what's the best way to divvy loot. We never did a formal version of DKP, or we never did a formal version of loot council or anything like that. We never formalized it because I always felt this is a social decision. Let the players work it out. Watch them struggle to work it out, watch them screw each other over at times, but those are all important moments.
That's so big to me.
That's where we learn, and that's where we grow, and that's what we remember, right? So
back in the boardroom, I don't know if you remember back, what the exact technological limitations were back then, but where those were discussions you guys are very much having, like, we could put in an LFG, we could put in a dungeon finder, we could put in some sort of personal loot system. You had the ability to do that, but you kind of socially engineered it so that, like, on purpose, is what you're saying? That was all very much premeditated.
A lot of times, And I had lost a lot of my influence by the time, some of those systems were being put in. But I remember distinctly arguing against flying mounts and arguing against Dungeon Finder. And I was a crazy person on the team. Like, no one actually... Because arguing against the technology of Dungeon Finder is near impossible. Because when you think about... And if you guys remember back, and I can imagine that a lot of you believed it was going to be the greatest thing, right? Like...
Yeah.
A lot of you were super excited.
Oh, sure.
And it was pretty awesome for the first month, right? And then, 5 years later, you don't realize how it's completely eroded the social dynamic of the game, right? But, I was seen as a total crazy person, and the technology was so powerful. Oh my gosh, cross-server Dungeon Finder, like turning, 50 queues into one, like... It was just like, oh, so great, right? And everyone on the team was so excited about it. And I was like, hold on a second.
It was interesting for us. So when LFG came out, I was in Wrath, and I remember distinctly we started our first guild, Defcamp and I, and our main way of recruiting was actually doing heroic dungeons in Wrath with people. And when LFG came out, we weren't able to do that anymore.
Right. So,
but you're right. We were super excited about it when it first came out, but we actually immediately noticed one of the downsides of it. It was like there was no intra-server communication with those players anymore.
Yep. And the other thing it did was it took away your ability to evaluate people in a natural setting, right? So you had to start leaning on other things like what's your gear score? What's your Raider IO, right? And that was it. It's just like, well, you got a high gear score, you're in. No, it turns out you're a total dick and don't fit in with our group at all. Right? Like, you got to find that out later, or you actually suck at your class, but you've been carried through a lot of these raids or, whatever it is, right? So,
it's that slippery slope we've all talked about. It's like one thing after another leads to another. And,
what's so great? It's like all those things we talked about is in 51 episodes before this, and now one of the actual original designers is just saying exactly what we, I suppose, all been thinking all this time, and why did they change those things? But I've been watching like the interviews with Ian about Shadowlands and stuff, and I noticed you had some videos about it as well. So, I think he's going slightly into the right direction.
I do too. Right. Like some of the things he's said in the last 6 months have. I'm as shocked as anyone to find myself like agreeing with Ian because traditionally and historically we couldn't be further from each other and from a design philosophy standpoint. But some of the things he's saying now have me really intrigued, and you can see some of the things he's pushing, right, are being fought tooth and nail by the community, right? So and he's partly responsible for the corner that he's painted into, but I appreciate his attempts to try to find his way out of it, and I do want to see him succeed in some of those things. And sadly, I don't think we'll see it in Shadowlands. I think the big questions will be more further down the line, the next expansion after that, or the expansion after that, because a lot of these things, it took a while to sort of change the game, so it's going to take a while to change it back. If that's even their intent, because there's a lot of retail players that are just like, no, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Classic is for the other people that want their thing, and we should leave retail the way it is and just have kind of two separate philosophies going at the same time. So, but we'll see, what their decision process is like going forward. But it has been refreshing to see Ian talking about some of this stuff in light of like what people have learned from Classic. So
I think what
it's nice.
Blizzard should also know is that we Classic players, we would like to have like a new experience as well.
You want Classic Plus, right? So you feel underserved because retail is still pumping out new stuff, but under the philosophy you don't like. And so what I don't think they have is the ability to run two MMOs at the same time. So, the Classic players are still kind of, we're happy that we have this thing. We want new stuff, and we have to accept probably just TBC and Wrath, for the foreseeable future. But
I'm happy with that.
At the end of the day, we actually just want, something brand new.
Exactly.
With the old philosophies. So, yeah.
But a lot of this has to be due to the success of Classic, these positive changes. And I think that's evident, right, Kevin? I mean, that's a lot of these positive changes are just really showing that, like, okay, it's, let's try to get some of these classes to feel more like they should, and let's try to, forget about the homogenization and do this.
Right.
And I think, I've always said, like, retail's kind of at a point where it would, like you said, it's going to take a long time to ever really make big waves and changes, because I think that, we look back in the day, and this is a question I wanted to ask you was, when there's issues in game, I've always been a big advocate for this. So like there's something like, someone, ninja looted something. First thing people want to do nowadays is like, contact the GM, get Blizzard involved. And my answer was like, no, let the server, let the people in the server, like, everyone on that server is going to know, hey, this guy's a dick. Don't run with this guy. Like, I love the idea of the server working and being its own police force. And obviously, there are points when Blizzard has to step in when certain things happen, but I feel like we're all so quick now to try and, have, fix this Blizzard, when vanilla and something this is Kargoz has proved with the hardcore community, that there's so much freedom within vanilla. We can create this hardcore community. We can create these things, and it's so hard to do within retail, and all these rigid, you have to do it this way or this way or this way, and all these things were thrown at you. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it is funny too. Obviously, I'm a huge designer, as you guys know, that's in favor of you guys policing yourselves for the most part, letting the social systems work themselves out, right?
Right.
And that there's also a customer service win in that same respect, because you talk about now how if you have the tools and if you're shown that it is up to you, it is your responsibility, then you have to start doing this stuff yourself. You won't go to a GM, which will ultimately save Blizzard money, right? Because they don't have to hire as many CMs or GMs. But in an environment where they want to save that money, it's so interesting to me that the design has pushed it into a place where they have to have even more, because the players are so used to, getting on the phone as soon as something bad happens, right? Like they're creating this expectation in the world with their design that we're never going to have a pain point. We're never going to have a moment of friction for you in the game, right? So if that ever happens, something's drastically wrong. Oh no, I'm butthurt about something. Something's really wrong here, right? So, and then it's like, well, I have to call them and tell them, something in their game design is flawed, where it's like, back in the day, it was like, no, get used to getting butthurt, right? Like it's going to happen constantly. Get over it, figure out a way to get past it, right? And you eventually learn how to work through those elements, right?
part of the fun.
Is there anything in Classic looking back, because it seemed like, towards TBC and Wrath, the game was blowing up, they got more people involved, so your leverage as one of the 3 original ones may have dwindled or went down a little bit, right? So, it's not like your say just goes automatically. Is there anything within the Classic timeline that either bugs you, seems like a missed opportunity, something that, you wish if you could change one thing in Classic looking back that you would have changed? And on that same note, is there anything that you're just super proud of in the Classic timeline that you think you guys just hit it out of the park?
I assume by Classic you mean vanilla.
Just
okay.
Original.
So what am I super proud of? The stuff I worked on individually was the talent system and the talents themselves. That was a system that performed really well considering what its objectives were. It did so much work at helping players have a sense of individual identity within their class, right? So as a warrior, I felt different than the warriors standing next to me. So the talents did did a lot of work in that respect. And also giving you lots of fun decisions along the way as you were leveling up your class on, getting you excited about. Just from a progression standpoint, did a great job. And thirdly, helping you realize your class fantasy, right? Because when you imagine, okay, I'm going to make a warrior. Well, there's tons of different iconic warrior templates within movies and books and everything else, right? That we all love from, growing up or whatever it is. But we hand you a warrior and he's pretty basic, right? But the talents help you finish that vision off of what you're trying to make, right? So, and that was huge in helping everyone realize the more specific class fantasy. Am I the dual wielding warrior? Am I the 2-handed warrior? Am I the sword and board warrior? Am I looking for a Boromir style or a Conan style or, Aragorn style, whatever it was?
I like that you mentioned Lord of the Rings here. My guilt is found on Lord of the Rings. It's called a fellowship.
Right. Yeah, Dunedain. Yeah, that's awesome. So it did a great job in that, and also it was very gratifying to see the rest of the industry talent systems became sort of industry standard, and even for games that weren't MMOs, you started to see them pop up in shooters and. Of course, strategy games, but it just seemed like every game that was coming out had a talent system of some kind. So that felt pretty good that this system had served WoW so well that people were fascinated with it and wanted to work it into other games, even games where the talent system didn't really fit because it didn't have the same needs, but people were still jamming talent systems in because they liked them so much. So that was very gratifying. From a project standpoint, it has to be the Horde Alliance faction split. That wasn't going to be a thing in WoW. But I convinced Alan Adham, who was the lead designer and one of the founders, that we had to have, orcs versus humans, basically.
Wait, just a minute here. Wow. You said that originally WoW wasn't supposed to have faction split?
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, the whole, most of the team was an EverQuest. They were all EverQuest fans, right. And EverQuest didn't have a faction split, right? They had, you had trolls and you had humans, and the humans couldn't go to the troll town, and the trolls couldn't go to the human town, but trolls and humans could, group as much as they wanted, just like anything else. So that was the basis for, what WoW was going to be. And so I, one night, just wrote this huge paper about why PvP was important, why factions were important, why competitiveness was important. And I was kind of just out of my mind. I was quoting Fight Club and in this rant, and
nice.
I gave it to him, and then he came in the next day and he's like, yeah, I basically agree with everything you just wrote. So and then he started convincing one by one everyone else that we absolutely needed factions in the game. So, and faction connection is one of those things that I think shines when it comes to your identity. When you talk about yourself personally, it's for the Horde, for the Alliance. That's probably the one thing that stands above. Yes, your class is important. Yes, your race is important. But which faction you're on, I think for most people is sort of number one when it comes to identity.
Yeah.
I mean, people were putting Horde stickers on their cars, and it was kind of crazy, right? And we were treating each other differently. Because like another question I wanted to ask you, Kargoz, back in middle school was, did you know other classmates that were playing? And did the Horde go to one side and did the Alliance go to the other in your class?
So I originally, my first character was a Tauren warrior on the Illyria realm. It was normal because I didn't know what that realm meant, right? So I made a Tauren warrior and I got to level 17 and I was so happy because I got my friends involved, right? And I was like, yo, I'm going to have a huge advantage over them. I'm level 17 already. You know, I'm going to be like the big Chad in the middle school. Like, you know, I'll be way higher than them. And they're like, nah, we're going to go Alliance. So I had to reroll. I had to reroll Alliance with them, but it's just so crazy. I can't imagine. Type something in the chat if you can even envision a WoW with no factions. The fact that you drove that forward is like shattering like the fact that like everything right now. That's just
and it affected the way you interacted with people in real life. You know, like, oh, you play WoW, awesome. Oh, you play the Alliance. Oh,
yeah, but I got a really funny.
Like, I don't think we can be friends. You know, like I'm not going to date you. You're dear God, what?
Yes, Kevin. First, okay, let me just say. Do you still have that document and can I buy it from you? No, I'm kidding. Okay.
That's right. I'd love to see it myself.
So the night that Wrath of the Lich King came out was a midnight release, right? Mm-hmm. And I go to GameStop to pick it up, and there's this whole giant line outside, and you know, there's this really cute girl, and I had like just gotten out of rehab recently, so I'm like kind of like awkward and like not really talkative, kind of, you know, socially awkward. And we go in there. And the girl starts talking to me. I say, oh, you're here for WoW, you know, this, that, and the other. And we start talking, and she's really cute, right? So, and I go, I'm like, you know, where do you play? And she's like, oh, I play on so-and-so server, and I play a female night elf hunter. And I'm just like,
oh, how did I know?
Oh, cool. And I just walked away. Walked away from her. I mean, I hate female night elf hunters so much, but it's just it's so funny because I couldn't say anything. I just walked away and I'm like, hey, no, never mind.
What? No slash spit? What's up? I thought you were representing.
I couldn't imagine Azeroth without Horde and Alliance. Like, I mean, we are such. Yeah, it's such a.
Obviously, it worked out, right? But so I'm pretty proud of that from a project standpoint.
Thank God.
As a shot have gone very differently.
Yeah. We got the poor Dunedain here, the only Alliance player. So, well, Kevin, you played Alliance back in the day, right?
But I have to apologize. I know it's hard enough to find, you know, a loved one in this crazy world, and all I've done is divide you further. So, for every person in chat who's missed out on a dating opportunity as rare as they are for us gamers, I apologize because of the faction split.
Yep. Kevin, you're the reason I'm single.
That's right.
What's your favorite class, actually, Kevin?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I get asked that a ton, too. But all 9 of them are my children. They're all beautiful and amazing and flawed. And, you know, so, yeah, I don't really have a favorite one. I will tell you that my 2 characters I kept high level, or max level, back when I was playing was an undead mage. But that was second to what was essentially the one I put the most time into, which was a human Redditon. So, which was partly because I knew their struggles and wanted to be the inside man. You know, I wanted to know exactly what they were experiencing and going through because I recognized that class was struggling from a class fantasy standpoint. And so I wanted to be elbow deep in the experience to better pull them out of it. So.
Maybe now is the time for my Paladin questions.
Yeah, go ahead, dude. Go ahead.
So I had like 1,000, so I tried to make 2 out of them. First up, well, the tier 2 set is like my favorite set in the entirety of the game. I don't know if you actually had a hand in the items as well, but the tier 2 set looks, yeah,
tier 2 is pretty amazing. I didn't artistically know, or stat-wise. I did give feedback on the set bonuses in a lot of cases, but yeah, the item guy did those for the most part. So,
okay, now, even though it looks the most amazing, it's basically just like one of the worst sets you can wear as a healer right now in class.
Right. Yeah.
So. When I look back at like Paladins from the first patch till the last, they changed quite a bit, right? So you had the talents moved, like Blessing of Kings was, I think it was like the 31 talent in red, if I remember correctly,
right,
or
early on.
Yeah. So I wondered, was it like originally supposed to be a hybrid, more of a real hybrid class, where you were in raids buffing and then sometimes swinging the hammer and then sometimes throwing a heal out
Right.
there?
That
Was
was
it like
essentially that is the class fantasy, I believe. Like when you imagine what is it going to be like when I play a Redidin, right? Your idea is I'm going to run in with my two-handed hammer, going to smack the crap out of stuff, and then occasionally I'm going to be healing, or at least I'm going to be contributing to the healing in some way. And then of course buffing and things like that. And yeah, that particular spec probably had the worst time of meeting their class fantasy, right? And that's kind of what I mean about when I say like, I wanted to get in there and really understand and play it and see what I had to do to realize that dream. But hybrid is, I don't think, the right word. Like I don't consider. The only class I consider to be a true hybrid in design philosophy was the original Druid, where it was shape-shifting constantly. But we moved away from that pretty quickly as well. So when I think of hybrid, I think of someone that can do multiple roles at the same time very effectively. And I don't think there's any of those in reality in WoW. Because all the specs lead you to do one job essentially pretty well.
Yeah. But if you look at like the old specs, like before the talent changed, I would say those were more of the hybrid style, where you could basically be holy but still swing your hammer a bit, or
right.
if needed. So was there a switch to more specific roles somewhere during?
Yeah, I think over time we started out with this idea that they would be capable of at more jobs than just one, but we realized how tricky that is to actually pull off, and what that does to, like, first of all, what it means to be successful, especially in a raid setting. It's like if you're 10% off the pace in a raid setting, then you're not viable, right? It's the way a lot of raiders feel. So a hybrid that comes in at 90% of two different things isn't really viable, right? Yeah. Even though they're a hybrid, you need specialists at the raid level. So you're doing 100% of one job, right? So, but that's not to say that like when I'm tanking Sunken Temple, I can't be healing myself or healing someone else occasionally while I'm tanking, right? Which is something a paladin can do. Or the druid, when it comes, whatever hits the fan, he can pop out and throw some heals, as a bear, or go into bear form when he's pulled aggro from too much healing because the main tank doesn't have enough mitigation or whatever it is, right? So there are hybrid experiences that you have, but it sort of depends on what you're expecting from the environment you're in, right? Because raid is very different than sort of running around leveling solo or participating in small group stuff and that kind of thing. So over time, I think you'll see that historically, a lot of the changes, again, were pushed towards that raid game because the raid people are very vocal. They're very competitive, and they want, what they want is very different than what the rank and file want in terms of competency. So it was something we learned with the Druid very early on, and that's what moved us away from his hybrid philosophy. Was it's not good enough to be 90%. You can be as good as all the jobs at 90%. You're still not going to get invited to the raid. So you have to be 100% at something. And so we started steering them towards, this is the tank tree, this is the DPS tree, this is the heal tree, right? And same with the paladin and all the other kind of, stranger combinations, shaman, etc. So
I'm probably
that's the goal.
Sorry, go on. Okay, I'm probably the only person in the world who would have liked to see Classic Lounge with 5-minute blessings, because I think it might have given the opportunity to play like the more support / hybrid style. Yeah. Because you're basically blessing and then healing a bit and then doing something else.
It actually was the original design. The blessings were actually supposed to be higher impact and shorter duration originally. We ended up falling into this middle ground that didn't feel great of 5 minutes and lower impact. Obviously, they still have pretty good impact, but lower than what they were originally designed at. So the idea kind of was that he'd be swinging his hammer, and then, at times during the fight, he would hit the rogue with a big DPS buff, for 30 seconds. And so the timing of that was perfect. Like, you don't want to get it in transition stages of a boss fight. You want to wait till he's able to do 30 seconds of good damage and put it on your highest DPS guy and let him run. And then other things like, the tank buff and a healer buff and things like that made them much better at their job. But you did, like you were pushing essentially more support buttons throughout. So that was one of the original designs. But yeah, we moved away from that.
Almost like totems, how totems are.
Similar. More single targeted totems, right? Friend targeted totems.
So interesting. I have one more. Actually, I started with the tier 2 because I thought it was designed for that more of support of hybrid style, maybe. Because you have stats of basically everything, right? But my second question was the seal system and the judge system.
Yes.
I think it's very unique. Is it like one of the things you're proud of, or is it something that you think could have been better? Because it was changed.
Definitely could have been better. Yeah.
Okay.
That was one that we didn't have enough time to iterate on, just flat out. There were a couple things we didn't have time for. One was more time to work on the hunter resource system. We wanted to change it from mana to not energy.
Focus.
What's it called? Focus. Yeah, that's what it's called. We wanted it. So we gave that a shot, and we couldn't quite get it there. So we changed it back to mana at the end. But I think if we had had a little more time, we might have been able to work out how to get a different resource bar on him. And the other one was the seal judgment system. Just didn't have. It was one of the last things I put in, and didn't have enough time to, really iterate and refine it. So that's why it went through a lot of changes pretty early on, because I had to use live time to get those changes in and to really iterate and experiment. So it didn't work out as well. I think it worked out pretty well in some respects, and it was very unique, but there were some things that could have been a lot better from the get-go.
Honestly, I think many paladins really, really enjoy the system. If I play now a paladin in BFA, for example, it's basically just totally gone. So I wonder, that's probably the last. I wonder, do you think they changed it too much? Is that like the soul of the paladin class? Is that gone by removing that system?
Yeah, like I think that's a complaint a lot of players have, and I think it's justified. You'll see like combo points kind of everywhere on classes nowadays. In the process, they've stripped away a lot of those things, because each class, when we were originally designing them, we wanted them to not only feel different and play different, but look different, especially if you saw one in action, right? So totems is one of those things that defines what a shaman feels like and looks like, and it's like, what is that guy? And then it's like, he pops a totem. Oh, there's no question, right?
Right.
But the retail shaman doesn't even throw totems anymore. So or it's like one spec throws all four at once, I think. But so when it's like, wow, I stopped feeling like a shaman, I can understand that, because that was specifically one of those things that identified you as the shaman, right? Like, made you feel so different, both mechanically and visually. So, and I think that was really important. So Paladin, same way, there were, different ways that they played and different ways things that they did and how their spells looked, that were identifiable. And again, it's about, as I was mentioning before, it's about offering a variety of different experiences so that different players get joy from different places in the game, So I've always considered the Paladin to be a more strategic class, right? And a more reactive class. Like, you're not a button monkey where you're just constantly pushing every button, every global cooldown, right? You're thinking and you're waiting and you're planning and you're figuring out when's the right time to do the right thing, right? So it's not checkers, boys. It's chess, right?
Didn't you say the class for beginners? And
rogue is for checkers. That's checkers. Yeah. You guys like checkers? Go play a rogue, right? You're spamming buttons. You have ADHD. Totally fine.
Absolutely.
Get in there. So again, it appeals to different types of players, right?
Yeah.
and a lot of people laugh at the Paladin because that's a joke. He's not pushing his buttons what a lame class.
It's kind of hard to do bubble Hearthstone, by the way. Just saying.
Right, it is very hard. The timing required, jeez.
So Kevin, another big thing that a lot of people are probably really curious about is you mentioned factions. First of all, that's mind blowing. The idea that there could have potentially been no factions. And this is just like a big lingering question in the community that always comes up almost every other stream. Is there Alliance favoritism? Is there Horde favoritism? Did they spend 10 times longer on the Alliance leveling experience as the Horde leveling experience? I don't know if you have any thoughts around that entire sort of bucket of questions. If not, maybe it's just as simple as whatever. And then the other last question to tie onto that is, what on earth is that portal in the Stormwind, gated behind Stormwind? And it's like swirling around. It's like a really, really big portal.
Right. Okay, so that one's easy to answer quickly. That was going to lead to player housing neighborhoods.
Oh,
wow!
But we never put in player housing. We can talk about that why later. But the other question was there favoritism. So at the end of the day, no, there wasn't favoritism. The team was pretty split, between Horde and Alliance as far as what people were playing amongst designers and the rest of the team. So, I always say. It's shocking to me that it actually turned out that way, because usually there's going to be a bias, right? Mm-hmm. But I was actually pretty shocked that it was really close to 50-50, and especially when I consider how just absolutely lame the Alliance is, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
So from that standpoint, there wasn't any bias. But here's what I will say: when we were developing WoW. We had to figure out, like, you guys probably heard the term vertical slice, which is what a lot of companies use to deliver, like, this is a version of the product that sort of tells you what the whole experience is going to be like, or it gives you some idea. It's sort of a showpiece, for moving forward. A lot of companies use it to secure funding, right? We didn't have to do that at Blizzard, but we still wanted to know what the game experience was essentially like, at its heart, right? So we focused on 3 zones at the start, and it was Elwyn, Westfall, and Duskwood, and we tweaked those zones, and we played those zones, and we iterated on those zones for probably 9 months to a year, right? That's how long we spent on just those 3 zones.
Wow.
And there was a time where we had to double the size of it, and all the level designers just about quit because they were like, are you kidding me? Like, I have to remake these zones completely. You can't just double the size of something. You have to remap everything, right? So, but we decided, the world was just half as small as it needed to be. So, and we put in quests, and we put in creatures, and we put in stories, and we, all that stuff. And we focused on those 3 zones for a huge amount of time to just help us define what the core experience was like, right? And then after we did that, when it was all done, we were like, okay, this is the core experience. This is what we should do with the rest of the world. And the producers were like, we can't do that. We can't spend a year on every 3 zones, right? And so we tried to reduce it to the core elements, right? And then, get as much done as we could. And we didn't even get all the way, right? Silithus, for example. But that's why if you play those 3 zones, you'll notice that the experience kind of is head and shoulders above the rest of the game. But it's only those 3 zones, right? All the other Alliance zones got just as much work as all the other Horde zones, right? So if you're asking about those 3 zones, absolutely. We spent more time on those 3. But, and we weren't just going to toss out all the extra awesomeness just because it wasn't on par with the rest of the world. So, but at the end of the day, we didn't have time to do the Elwyn, Westfall, Duskwood treatment to the entire world, sadly. But that's why, like, the Defias storyline is so memorable. It starts at level 1 and it finishes in the Dead Mines with Van Cleef, and the whole thing is just so connected and everything feels so great.
So good.
We couldn't quite do that. We just didn't have the time everywhere else.
Is there any truth that it was 90% of the time spent to an Alliance, 10% they just whipped up the Horde side together in the Barrens, or is it closer to like 60-40, 50-50, or maybe that's not even a good way to look at it?
Yeah, 90-10 is ridiculous, but because if you think about, and a lot of those zones are shared, right? So the idea is we're really only talking about low levels, right? The ones that seem for certain classes. So we're looking at sort of starting areas up to about, probably through the Red Ridge, like 25, 30. And after that, it's like, is Stranglethorn Vale an alliance zone or a horde zone, right? That's why we're fighting over it constantly.
Right.
Because we're trying to establish dominance.
Right.
But that zone was created for both sides. So, I don't think that there's I think it's a lot of it is just that feel of those three zones I mentioned. And that's where humans, right? That's where humans started. And that's where a lot of people start the game as a human. Yeah. So I can definitely see going from the human starting experience to any other race in the game, you're going to feel like, oh, they didn't put as much work into this. And, that's why. So
Night Elf is pretty good, though. I like, but it's probably the atmosphere and music and all that stuff.
Right. There's always just, that personal connection with different zones. Some people love certain areas versus others, and it's kind of a personal thing.
Yeah, from a horde all my life, I think the Barrens is an all-encompassing feeling when I go there. Yeah. You're there for so long, and it's just so vast. And I think it's I don't notice if there's any kind of imbalance because I feel like the Barrens is just everything for me as a horde. Yeah.
So that's another big thing that I think we've lost over the years is, a sign of success when you're talking about world building, and again, the best content being the players, is the personalities of various zones that pop up over time, right? The Barrens has a specific legendary personality for the way people behave in that zone, right? Stranglethorn has a specific personality. It has its own, its own character, right? Terran Mill, South Shore, it had that place. Hillsbrad has its own character, right? Compare that to what is the character of zones in MMOs nowadays, right? Do you feel like they have a socially or community driven personality? And it's I don't really know that or feel that. And I'd love to hear a story about the way certain zones in modern MMOs, have created that sense of identity and that kind of thing. But it doesn't happen as much anymore. And that's kind of telling that not enough work has gone into supporting that sense of world and the sense of social connection in the games, that these places sort of build up their own personalities that we remember and take with us.
I couldn't agree more, Kevin. I always say, other than the other people in the game, the second biggest interaction or person that is the world itself. Is the I've always felt like the world itself and the zones are one of the biggest interactions that you have. And for me, I'm a horde through and through. I love it, but my first character, unfortunately, was an Alliance rogue. I got him to level 60, and that first moment of walking into Stormwind, it's okay.
Everyone has a chance to mature.
That's right. Exactly. I actually sent a DM a message. I said, "Please let me re-roll," but whatever. But that first moment of walking into Stormwind and the music going and that feeling of the connection to the zone, the story to the zone, the whole thing with the Nixie and the Defias, and there's an element of almost a soul to it. You know what I mean? And I haven't felt that soul of a zone in a game in such a long time. I mean, for me, I think the Burning Crusade did that in a lot of ways as well. I mean, you had people always talk about what's your favorite zone? Negron. People love Negron. And I think what I'm going to talk a little bit about the Burning Crusade is, you guys really built upon the foundation that Vanilla was, right? So Vanilla was the foundation. And for me, the Burning Crusade is so much. I feel like there, obviously there were some things, like you said, looking back, flying and this and the other, but going into the Burning Crusade, building upon that foundation, not only with the world, but with the classes. I feel personally that the class designs in the Burning Crusade are perfect, almost. The amount of things that you had, the choices that, say, from a priest, I have Prayer of Mending, I have, Circle of Healing, I have all these different choices, all these different things that were added to the game. It makes me feel like every choice I make, also having to manage mana, also having to do, all these things, to me is just absolutely perfect. And but there were some things that I wondered because, priests in vanilla were so the only class in the game that had there were but racials for the class, right? So you had obviously dwarfs had Fear Ward, undead we had Devouring Plague, and I wonder why in BC did they start to shy away from that a little bit, because it was one element of vanilla that I really loved. Obviously there were still some, like you had Chastise for dwarves in the Burning Crusade. There were some things added, but everyone was given Fear Ward, right? Which was just so OP. Was it just because it was that powerful, I guess,
Right. Those things are tough to what's the right word? To be resolute, about over time. Another trend you guys have all noticed is the connection between developers and the community has gotten much closer over the years, right? Like, back in the day, none of you guys had any idea who I was and what I was doing, right? There was a real healthy distance between me and you guys.
Yeah.
And that helped me do my job, right? You guys had to interact with community managers that were trained to do that job and allowed me to do what I'm trained to do, which is my job. But a lot of developers, now that they're real close to the community, we're all human beings, right? And it's like when you're constantly bombarded by Fear Ward is OP, Fear Ward is BS, at the end of the day, you kind of want people to like you, right? So it's very tough to endure, just constant badgering about Fear Ward, right? And so you're always pushed to just give Fear Ward to everyone, make everyone happy, right? So that's one element of it. I've always said that you have to have the right amount of ego, to do this job, because you have to have enough to resist those temptations, right? Just to be liked by everyone. You have to tell people sometimes, no, it's better for the game that Fear Ward is a special thing for dwarves, right? And then, but not so much ego that you come across as this arrogant a-hole that never listens to anybody, right? But some of that is good, some of that built-in resistance to say no to the community is actually pretty important, because you want your vision to ultimately be realized, and not everyone that's playing believes in, understands, or agrees with your vision, right? And so you have to be able to tell those people that's not the direction we're going, right? And it's tough, it's tougher even now because the distance between developer and community is so much closer these days. You can get them on screen, you can have individual chats with them, right? And they're human beings too.
It's so true. Those words.
He's still a robot, but
those words really hit home for me. When I was a little kid playing, and I know some of you guys out in the chat, it always felt like Blizzard had bigger, better things to do. To get a hold of a Blizzard GM or something was this crazy thing. Now it feels like you can tweet at them, and something will happen. Which is a strange kind of Twilight Zone we're in.
And it creates that expectation too that not only can I, but it should change, right?
Exactly.
Now,
whereas before, it's you had to trust them, right? For better or worse, you had to trust the guys behind the curtain that they wanted to make a great experience. They were there, and to make a great experience, and they were good at it. You guys had to trust, and we made mistakes, but our hearts were in the right place, and I still think their hearts are in the right place on the WoW retail team. But. It's become harder to trust them because of that,
very
communication.
Harder.
Very harder. Now, going back to Classic, and it may not necessarily be a mistake. When you just look back at your baby, which is a Classic, or no, not Classic. I keep using it wrong. What do you refer to it as? Vanilla or original? Just Vanilla. When you look back at Vanilla and the whole timeline, if anything was a mistake that you wish you could have changed in your own. In your own separate alternate universe, maybe something jumps out at you there. But also, what do you wish, if anything, could have been added to the vanilla game? Or does anything stick out, like regrets, mistakes, room for improvement? Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I didn't fulfill, one of my dreams was more world PvP, more design around world PvP. naturally, it happened naturally, but there were no incentives, there were no rewards, right? Like, other than just dominance and flexing and bragging rights, but and a good time. It was also a good time, but because I was the PvP guy, obviously, because I'm the one who pitched the factions. You know, I came from a more PvP oriented background in games, whereas they all came from EverQuest, or most of them came from EverQuest, where PvP was seen as a griefing thing, and they were just fine not having it at all. But my first love was class design, so that's what I ended up focusing on, and I didn't have time to also do World PvP, so I had to get all 9 classes up and working and, you know, ready to go. So that's one of my regrets, is that I didn't have more time to work on World PvP, and so it kind of got left to the wayside. And eventually, you know, some design went in later on, but even then I wasn't a huge participant in that because I was so busy with the classes. So that's something I wish we had done more of.
Yeah. Kev, real quick, going back to Defcamp's question, I don't think I've ever heard this answered. Why were priests the only class that had racial specific abilities?
Because priests, you know, like, it was sort of our expression of religion in the game, even though there isn't technically religion in the game. And so it felt very strange to have such a wide variety of cultures as represented by the races have such a one-dimensional, you know, religious aspect. So it was sort of our way of help fleshing out the different cultures, right? Like, I mean, because when you ask somebody, clearly an undead priest has a very different outlook on the world than a human priest, right?
Yeah.
And so we tried to give, you know, the class a couple extra abilities to help, you know, sort of flavor them, or again, thematically connect them with what we believe to be their culture and that kind of thing. So we wanted to do it for all the classes, like all the classes. Like an orc warrior would have a special ability versus a dwarf warrior, but I felt it was critical to do it for the priest, and we ended up not having time to do it for every other class. So
great. Thank you for doing it for priest.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. I got to say too, another thing, racials, right? So racials are very important to classic WoW, and I think as time went on, racials became less and less important.
Right.
You know, you have this thing where, you know, like axe specialization for orcs, right? Or you know, berserking for trolls, and like, you know, I love being I love the fact that I can be a Tarn elemental shaman who can go in there, war stomp, and then chain lightning, and like, you know, they're so pivotal to the gameplay in classic WoW, the racials. And I think it was such an interesting thing to see over time how they, you know, people was, oh, this racial's so overpowered and this one's overpowered.
Right.
But I think, you know, each class has these very distinct features, you know, and you have, you know, stone form for dwarfs, and obviously there's the metas that come out, right? You have, you know, if you're going to be a warrior on the alliance, got to be human. If you're going to be a warrior on the horde, you got to be orc. There's ways to get around it, you know, edge masters and stuff like that. But I think what initially happened was, you see, you know, you get this people who gravitate towards certain races. Like I always said, like Tarns are bros, right? They're like really, you know, bro, chill people. But it changed the play style of so many of these classes. You know, being like a Tarn warrior who can go in there and war stomp, you know, and get mobs and stuff like that. Were you integral in the decision when it came to racials and stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. And to tell you a little bit about the design, we designed some of them to be. We wanted at least one to be the high power one, or the power relevant one, and one to be more flavorful that was not power relevant. And so, and people love to compare, right? They'll point to your strong one, and then they'll compare it to their weak one, and they'll say, see, this is totally BS, right? But the comparisons are kind of intentionally unfair, right? They also don't talk about the intangibles, right? Like, yeah, sure, maybe Shadow Meld isn't very usable on a lot of, you know, on a lot of classes in a lot of situations, but if you play a female night elf, you know, don't forget that you're being given tons of free gold and gear by, you know, dudes on the internet, right? So that's just one of those intangibles that people don't want to talk about.
That's absolutely true.
So, again, it's like, but ultimately it's designed to complete like what you'd expect. Again, the thematic of what does it feel like to be a Tauren? It feels like I should be able to just stomp the ground and everyone shudders. And that came, of course, straight out of Warcraft 3. But that just feels good. It feels big and powerful, and makes me feel like I'm this big race. And then also it helps create replayability. Even if you're going to replay the same class. So a dwarf hunter, is the cinematic guy with the rifle and the bear, and then you go play, a troll hunter, and you might have a bow or maybe one of those rare crossbows, and you have a raptor pet, again, replayability, same class, but you're getting a very different experience, hopefully. So it helps with those kind of things.
Wow.
So I think I'd like to transition, if that's okay with everyone else, to something that's kind of a little more future oriented, but I feel, I've had the opportunity to talk to Kevin about Shaman. I know his mindset, and I know, from that perspective. Do you guys want to open up and see if we can get some class-specific questions in chat before we transition, Kargoz? Because I want to talk about TBC big time for a little bit before we say goodbye. Does that sound...
From my perspective, I mean, the class balance is what it is. So, I don't have anything,
Actually,
I don't either, but I'm sure chat might. But
I have one left about Warrior specifically. So what you see in Classic is guilds running 20 warriors and stuff. That's not the issue, but what you recently see now is tanking without shield, like Fury tanks. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
If that's something that would have happened during actual vanilla, is it something you would have changed and would have made warriors use a shield tank?
I wouldn't have forced it, but I think here's one of the big problems. One is there's that weird bug with Heroic Strike, right? Which, what does it do? I believe it.
Heroic Strike queuing? Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So basically,
and you should.
It normalizes hit on the offhand. You're supposed to get you have a penalty on hit when you're dual wielding, but it normalizes that. Yeah.
So it is a DPS and threat generator, right? This bug that helps you do more threat than you probably should, right? But I think ultimately, I think where the game shines the best is that tanks are struggling to maintain high levels of mitigation and threat, and they're not worried about damage, right? Their core concerns are mitigation and threat, and that's their job, right? And the best way to accomplish that, hopefully, is, defensive stance with a shield, that sort of thing. But it's also natural that once things go on farm status and the game, like you've sort of mastered the game, that everybody sort of loosens up, right? And part of that loosening up means you can start doing weird things like naked runs on Onyxia or, everyone's running meme specs, whatever it is, right? So I'm totally fine with, eventually the game getting to that point, but I think the game is, at a good design place when people are encouraged and in some cases required mathematically to do the things that you would expect to be the things you're supposed to do, right? So very intuitive, right? The intuition should be, I'm about to tank a big dragon, so I better strap on my shield, go into defensive stance, and be scared of this dragon's damage, right? And so I think that's where the game sort of is at its best, right? But I'm not surprised, and Classic is such a weird animal because we've been hammering on it on private servers, et cetera, for 15 years, that I'm not surprised that a lot of this stuff is coming out and everything is, easier for a lot of people. And stuff like this is happening, but it certainly wouldn't have been my design intent that the best way to tank a dragon is to be dual wield Fury, right? That would have signaled to me that the game's not hitting hard enough. The spec, the spec I intend for you to be using isn't required enough. Like the advantages it's giving aren't powerful enough in the ways that you need them. So I would have looked at it for sure.
That's what's happening right now, right? I just one thing.
But I think it's just ultimately it's more of a reflection of how a lot of the content is considered easy by today's standards. People have mastered it.
Also, but without world buffs, it's still an issue, I think. But anyway, we now have found a way to generate even more threat, which is by using a Paladin using
Right.
debuff.
That's
And-
another bug I would have
Yeah.
fixed, right? Like,
Okay.
I don't think that's the intent. It's also not a great play pattern as you spamming the same buff on a group of classes
It
to
is,
generate
yeah.
threat, you know?
On the other
Like,
hand, it does make it worthwhile to bring a Prot Paladin
yes,
now.
yes. So I'm happy about that, but again, I'd rather the ultimate place for me is a design space where the paladin's being brought on his merits and it's a fun play pattern that makes sense and it's intuitive for him, rather than some weird way of getting him in the game because of some what I would perceive as a bug and he's doing really oddball things. Well, if you don't wear pants and you push this series of buttons, in just the right order that feels really clunky and weird, that's how you tank, like I would want to fix that.
So my last thing that I've been dying to get off my chest here is pretty much related to this community that we've all been kind of participating and building towards, called the Hardcore Challenge, Hardcore Community. So we're basically experiencing the world with one life, and oftentimes we have these moments where we're like, man, it really feels like the world was almost designed to be like this. And one of the aspects of the Hardcore Challenge is solo self-found, which is, I guess, another term they've used in these types of games in Diablo and stuff, where there's no trading, there's no auction house, and we're finding weird workarounds to get deep stuff in professions done through fishing, through skinning, and doing weird things like that. So any guidance you have on that front of how to keep that community going. I mean, the community just feels amazing. It's all those original vanilla vibes there. It's hopefully a turning point where people can start viewing the game more as a sandbox and not just experiencing it, just killing the dragon. Now you're setting your own fun, all that. But I guess to get to the actual question in this, what are your thoughts on the auction house and player trading? Is that something that you purely feel good about, or Yeah, it's funny. Somebody just asked me on Discord recently. First, to just talk about the hardcore thing, I love it. I think it's amazing. And I think the reason it's so popular that you guys have discovered and you've even mentioned is it's bringing that sense of real danger back. It's it's bringing that sense of like you're scrambling for components, you're scrambling for items. Like you don't exactly know where everything is, right? So you're having to go through that process of discovery, and it's turning you back into a real WoW gamer, right? Like, and it's exciting, it's exciting to get those juices flowing again, right? And especially in a game that you've played to death, right? So, and unfortunately, you had to make your own game, essentially. You had to create your own rule set, and which I totally love, but it's sad that you're forced to do that, right? Because the game industry itself is struggling to put forward this type of game experience, right? But yeah, I absolutely love it. So keep enjoying that. It's amazing. That feels so good to get the Kevin Jordan blessing right there.
That's right. That's right.
Blessed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And about the auction house, like, it was close. That was one of those things that we argued about a lot, whether or not to put the auction house in. But here, and I feel like it was always the correct decision, because this is, in today's age, this is something you guys can envision, and I think would be horrible. But imagine life without the auction house, right? You go into Ironforge, and the chat channels are spammed with bots advertising wares in every channel, right? Because they're trying to connect goods to customers, right? Because there's no other natural way to do it, right? So it would turn every channel into an unusable mess, right? So, and it would even be unusable from a trading standpoint, because you, as a person, you can't really find what you're looking for, right? When it's like all this stuff is being spammed past you, right? Like, I want this one thing, it's like, good luck. Good luck finding a stack of linen, like in this just giant mess of spam, right? So I ultimately, I think the auction house was the correct decision, but it was a tough one for us because it eliminated a lot of that person-to-person interaction, which at its heart, I think, is really important for a crafting, marketing, sort of trade skill to player relationship, right? There's a lot of socialization that can go on when people are trying to find, connect goods to customers, right? And that's kind of stuff is really memorable because you remember who your guy is. Like, oh, I got a guy for that, like I know a guy who sells healing potions. I'm going to go to him, and I love it when he's on, and I tip him because I bought 100 of them from him, and he feels great. that's all he wants to do is run around the world and collect ingredients to make healing potions. So he feels like he's part of the world, and he's got his customer base and people like him. And, he ends up being the big guy for healing pots. And so he feels like he's the king of the market. Like there's so many good things that come about from that sort of experience. And we tried to tweak the auction house to simulate that by making sure that the name of the seller is on the auction house and stuff like that. But it didn't quite get there. And it's very possible there's a middle ground design where it's like, it's not quite the auction house, but it's not bot spam. Maybe there's specific areas, where you can set up vendors, and the vendors are zoned off in certain organizational ways. And, maybe there was something more we could have done with the design to sort of meet the two elements halfway. But at the end of the day, I think the auction house was still better than not having the auction house, just straight up.
I think enchanting is sorry, Defcamp.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, enchanting's a lot. When you have the professions, you have a lot of different ways for people to get together and coordinate. Well, okay, let's. This person just came on. The enchanting person just came on.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go talk to him. Or
Right.
And I think that's a cool way to kind of circumvent that a little, or just still have that. But I know Melderon wants to talk about TBC, and I just wanted to get your input on something, Kevin. So when Dunedain was talking about the warrior and being able to like a dual wield tank and to be able to do that, I feel like a lot of those things are possible now because of what the world buff meta has turned into. So you get all these people stacking world buffs, and you have so much SAM and so much that wearing a shield really doesn't even become necessary anymore. You pop a stone shield potion, you got all these world buffs, and you're good to go, right? And I think what's happened is we've seen to an extent now in Classic where almost every guild goes in there stacking all the world buffs. You got your ZG buff, you got your DM buff, you got you got everything, right? You got the Dragon Slayer, even the Alliance are getting the War Chief's blessing, from mind controls and stuff like that. So like we talked about this before. Obviously, Melderon made a video on it, but I'm wondering like what are your thoughts on the way it's become now, where it's like everyone's almost forced to do this. It feels like even if one person gets world buffs in the raid, well, now the tank's going to get it because he's going to be pulling off the tank, and it's like it's this world buff effect that happens. I'm wondering like what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, can we get some love for shaman tanks in there? Like
hell yeah,
right? I want to hear stories of shamans clearing AQ40, right? Like, let's go.
I mean, honestly, I think it's possible.
Anyway, but world buffs in general, unfortunately there was just no oversight on the world buffs. Like it was a bunch of people putting in content that was cool, like it was flavorful and it was cool, made you feel good about doing certain things. And there was no like game design oversight on like, is this too much? How do these things stack? And we didn't get around to doing that oversight until TBC, where we put them in categories and we limited, how many you could have total and all that stuff.
Right.
And really taking a look at that. So it was just, again, there's just something we kind of missed, and it became an emergent part of the experience of high-end raiding, but it's not a very healthy, like emergent part of the game, right? So it takes too much time. It encourages bad behavior once you have them, the logging out and that kind of thing. And then it creates a huge gap between the haves and have-nots when you're trying to do content you're trying to do. So ultimately, I think the right place for world buffs to land is if you're having trouble as a guild getting through a place, or getting through a dungeon boss, you should be able to put in a little extra time, collect some world buffs, get all your ducks in a row and get every conceivable advantage, and it can help you push across the line, right? But it should be a matter of 10% or so, right? So
right.
If it's not going to make the difference in a guild, it really shouldn't be where they're trying to, be, right? So, but yeah, obviously we're a long way from that in Classic, and probably still too far in TBC, to be honest. But I think that's part of the contract, that we. Yeah. I talk about the contract between the game and the players a lot, but the contract is you can get there. You can accomplish your goals by some amount of time put in and skill, right? And the amounts of each of those kind of depends on, your strengths, right? So if you're really skilled at the game and you're really organized, you can probably do content without world buffs. But if you need that little extra bit of help because you're not as good, you're not as organized, not as prepared, not as present, too many guys watching Netflix on their second screen, right? Then go get those world buffs, right? And they'll help push you over the line, right? So, I think that's well within, right? Like, again, the core contract is that you can make up for your lack of skill a little bit by putting in more effort, more time, because at the end of the day, we're not actually our characters. We're a bunch of sweaty nerds sitting in our chairs pretending we're heroes, right? So the game should try to meet you halfway and help you realize that dream by all it requires is that you lock yourself in your basement for a couple of weeks and you'll get it done, right? So I think that's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, Melderon, do you want to transition into TPC?
Yeah. So I have some questions. Okay, I'll start with first question, Ken, if that's okay. And I'd like to wait for your answer before I ask the second one. But what are the chances that Blizz screws this up and doesn't release TBC? I think that it's going to be a huge thing. If they don't do it, I think they're just missing a huge amount of money here. Absolutely.
They would have to transition to a philosophy of like, we don't like money for some reason. So,
right.
Yeah, they would absolutely. They're absolutely going to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So, learning what we learned from Classic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the argument of don't change anything is still the right way to do TBC?
I've never thought that was true. Like, I have my mug here. You guys remember from, Classic, right?
Yeah.
No changes.
Right.
Classic, right? I understand with the core philosophy, but I don't think anyone actually agrees that don't touch anything is what is actually happening or what we actually want, right? So There are bugs that should absolutely be fixed because they ruin the game experience, right? Like, and you should expect that, right? Like, if someone finds a bug in vanilla right now that crashes the servers that anyone can exploit to crash the server, right? No one's going to go, no changes, right? No. They're going to say, fix that bug, right? So again, it's like the argument only goes so far, right? So they should absolutely change things to make the experience better. Now, that, of course, is a very easy thing to say and much harder to do, because what that means in a detailed specific way is a much tougher question. And they don't have a big team to answer that question. Yeah. And they don't have any designers that I know of on the team that can answer that question, right? So this is where things get tricky, right? So it's not just a matter of should they change certain things, but are they capable of fixing them in a good way, right? Mm-hmm. I think what they've been doing so far, because they don't have game designers on the team and don't want to put a lot of effort into, supporting the game, is they've kind of just hid behind the, no changes flag, right?
Yeah.
In cases where they didn't want to put in the work, or they don't know how to change it well, or don't know what the right answer is. And in some cases where they have changed things, I don't think that they've always made the right decision on how to change things. So pushing them to change things can also lead to a bad result as well. So it's something else we should be aware of. But yeah, that's kind of my stance on no changes.
Yeah, because there's some specific things that I'm worried about, and it's the underperforming of Melee compared to casters. This is all from like what we've learned from private servers. It could be different, but
right.
Horde Paladins out DPSing Alliance Paladins due to what's it called? Something in Blood, Defcamp?
Seal of Blood.
Yeah. Shamans being insanely popular due to the fact that you can rotate them in groups during combat, bloodlusting the highest DPS group, and leatherworking being so powerful with drums. These are the things that I'm kind of worried about, and it's going to turn. Even though world buffs are gone, I'm just scared of some of this metas.
I'm not. That's interesting.
I've heard that everyone's going to switch to Horde, essentially.
Pretty much,
once
right? Yeah.
TBC hits. I've heard the threats. And yeah, it's possible, right? It's certainly possible that becomes a reality. It's certainly possible that people discover things on the Alliance side that we hadn't known before in, some combination of interactions that's present in TBC Classic that isn't present in private servers, that sort of throws us a different direction. Some of that is just we have to wait and find out. It's probably right, and it will certainly be the meta day one because, we'll feel like we've got it all figured out. We've had enough time to figure it all out. And so the first drops will probably be using these methods rather than experimental methods.
Yeah.
And how it can be difficult to change the meta once it exists. It takes a pretty brilliant person or group of people to convince the rest of the, world that this is the right way to do it. That's different. So we might have to wait a little while for that. But yeah, ultimately I feel like if it's something that's creating a bad player experience on both an individual level or at a community level, it's the kind of thing that should be looked at for potential change. So
yeah,
you guys are way more versed in what those specific things are than I am, and can speak at a higher level to those things. That was never my gig, but I was always just like, does this create bad atmosphere, a bad environment, or a bad play pattern that I need to worry about?
What's interesting is I think like Melderon's more hesitant towards things that I'm actually, there's always going to be a meta, right? So there's always going to be, back in class where we have in Classic now, we have a lot of warriors. In TBC, we're going to have probably more shamans. We're going to have, things are going to happen. A lot of people are going to do leatherworking. I'm okay with those things. I'm a lot more worried about, like you said before, the fact that we are going to maybe have more Horde. Like the servers are already so messed up on our part. Like we play on Skyrim, it's 97% Horde right now.
Right.
Like I'm wanting to know, like, what are we going to do when we go into TBC? Because I'm very much in the realm whereas like I started playing, I wanted to play on Blizzard servers because I don't want to have to start all over again, right? On a TBC fresh. So I want to continue my character. I think that's I think people would riot if they said fresh, TBC servers, your character's gone from Classic, all your achievements, everything, you lost it. So I want to see, being able to say, transfer my character to a TBC realm, and then hopefully we could try to figure out this, I don't know if they maybe would have to put a cap on how many Horde you can have per server, versus how many Alliance. But at the end of the day, like those things that you're worried about, Melderon, I don't think are that big of an issue. Like, there's going to be shamans, there's going to be, people doing this, people doing that. I think the fundamental things we have to worry about are, well, the other thing too is
maybe Kevin has an idea of how to implement it properly.
Yeah, and I would love to hear that.
That's a tough one. I think the only thing that really works when it comes to population control is depriving players of the game, right? Which means queues, essentially.
Yes.
Like it's not enough to give incentives and stuff like that, like in-game incentives, right? Because a lot of people care just too much about winning, and it's also usually more valuable in the end to always be winning than to get 50% more from wins on the other side when you're never winning, right? So I think the only thing that it really forces people to go a different way is you can play the game as Alliance or you can not play. Those are your choices, right? And then even then, people are constantly going to be trying to, play on Horde. They just, in the meantime, they'll have new mods that are like always showing you when it's a good time to try to log in with your Horde guy and while you're playing your Alliance and things like that. So it's a tough one to solve because everyone hates queues, obviously, and no one likes waiting for the game, that especially when it's one that they've paid for. And they're not interested. Most people aren't interested in the health of the game or the community, right? They're way more interested in their personal enjoyment. So it's tough for them to understand things like queues that are designed to course correct big problems like this at the expense of their personal enjoyment. So they're very difficult for companies to implement. because the forums just get lit on fire, right?
Yeah.
What's the most logical way you think we get our characters over? Do you think it's a fresh start? Do you think it's transferring? Do you think it's... Because I feel like MMOs is about, like, what are all these Scarab Lords going to do if they don't get their Scarab Lord title? Or they can't take their Thunder Fury with them, or their High Warlord title?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, are you asking about server transfer or transitioning from...
I guess, transition. What's the best way to transition from Classic to TBC? Sorry. Yeah.
I think it's opting in. I think it's the best way. I think, which is kind of the opposite of the way it went down. And I think a lot of people disagree with that, what I'm saying. But I think a lot of people have demanded vanilla, be re-released as Classic WoW because they want to play Classic WoW forever, right? Mm-hmm. And so showing up one day and have your character be sort of TBC lit and then having to do something to undo that, I think is too jarring. So I think it's the right move to be something that you want to opt in on, because I know a lot of people are just want to play Classic. That's what they fought for. They don't want anything to do with TBC. They just want to live in that world forever. So
I'm kind of in that boat, Kevin, man. If I'm being honest, I like TBC. I'll happily play it, but my dream, and call me delusional or whatever, would be: is there a way to build upon? Because I just love the power creep. And forgive me if that's a misusage of the term, but in Classic, you're just like a dude with a stick. You're just a regular druid in the ranks of the of the Emerald, Cenarian Circle or whatever the Druid ranks are called. Like, you're so low power level, there's not that much space aliens or spaceships or anything like that. It's closer to that Tolkien fantasy. So, like, in my selfish world, I would love a way to have, like, a WoW 2 or just something to build on this original universe.
Right.
I agree with that.
You want an alternate universe that sprouts from Classic or from vanilla.
Yeah, and stays on that same wavelength, but I don't know. It's probably never gonna happen.
No, I agree. Yeah. People ask me all the time if I prefer TBC to Classic, and it's tough. And I think Classic wins out just barely, despite the fact that I think, like I was agreeing with Defcamp earlier when he said the classes and the specs were all in a great place, because I think I really hit my stride in the class and spec design being a lot more well-rounded in terms of, people playing and enjoying and getting invited to the raids and all that stuff in TBC, right? So, but there are a lot of other places where the game, I think, got, incrementally worse. So I think Classic barely wins out for me, but there's a lot of good things I like in TBC. Yeah. But to agree with you, Kargoz, like, it's just so grounded. The scope of it feels so right, like just that slow, steady progression from 1 to, 60 uber geared max, superhero, just feels right. And then TBC, we did some different things that, like you were saying, the power progression and the power creep, we just kind of released the hounds and things got crazy from there. So, and nowadays, of course, you see exactly what you'd expect, it's like, we got to do another number squish. People are swinging their sword for 5 million damage with an auto attack. It's like, what is going on? It's so awkward, right? I feel like I'm this like Warhammer 40K battleship, firing a broadside, volley at somebody rather than a guy swinging a sword.
I wonder, what are your thoughts on normal versus heroic mode dungeons, for example, or raids later on? I know people that would say it's a necessary evil, right? Like the reason for that is to take a dungeon that's very difficult and time consuming to make from a interior designer and multiply it into additional content, right? Oh, we get to reuse the same assets multiple times, which gives people 2-3 times the content, right? That's good for us because, they consume content so fast, right? But I think there's a tipping point on dungeons where you enjoy it the first X number of times, and then your enjoyment goes severely down, right? And it starts to feel really grindy. So I don't think that format helps with that. And so what you're adding, the content that you're adding is actually worse, right?
Because it's like, yeah, people enjoyed the first 10 runs of a dungeon. Obviously, this varies depending on who you are, but that second 10 isn't really adding content. It's adding bad content or grindy content or boring content. Yeah, it's a little bit harder, but in terms of like atmosphere and the things you're fighting and, you know, stuff like that, it's all kind of getting kind of boring, right? So, and I've always been in the position of, you know, create as much quality content as you can. And then when it runs out, it runs out. And it's like, okay, time for you guys to play other games at worst, or at best, you know, create your own modes for having fun. Just interact with each other, do crazy things, run meme specs, you know, like go
Hardcore.
Socialize, go, you know, go do crazy stuff that, you know, like look at all the machinima that was created back in the day, right? Like, so much of that is so good. Like, and that's because you're free to do that because you're out of content, right? When there's always more content to do, there's always a way to get your item score up higher. You're tied to that, or a lot of players are tied to that, and they don't even think about having fun and creating fun experiences and doing other things until they're past that moment, right? So ultimately, I think the hardcore modes and stuff like that are not a great game design model, and also just from, again, a thematic standpoint of like, it's weird that people go to a place and it's not just the place, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you think about BRD, that's just the place. You see it for the first time, you dream about getting there someday. At some point you walk in, it's totally rough, you know, you have a great time. Eventually you crush it. You think about it in the past tense. You're excited to go there with a different class maybe, but it isn't like, oh, and now we get to do hard mode and run it back, you know, like it's just BRD, right? It's a place that fits within the world. It's a living part of the world, and it's exactly what it's supposed to be and nothing else. It's not a game mechanism, it's a world mechanism as well. So
so refreshing. It's really
it's important for things. It's important for, you know, everything to fit in that sense, right? Again, not just a game construct, but a world construct, a social construct. Like these are the three pillars I talk about all the time of like how MMOs should be designed, in my opinion. So,
well, Kevin, I got to say, I 100% agree with you with the opt-in version for TBC. I think that is the most logical. That is the most fair. And I think, like, you know, there's a lot of people, like you said, who are going to want to continue to play Classic, to do these things, and you know, whether they continue at a post Nax or I don't know, refresh the servers, whatever. I think being able to opt in and say, hey, like I want to transfer my character to this TBC server and continue there. Right. But my question is, you know,
well, before you ask your question, maybe can we afterwards, guys, can we look at Defcamp's parses? Because he's only getting 100% agreement with me. I think we can maybe squeeze a little bit more out of him.
Hey, I got pretty good parses, all right? We're all,
okay.
I think, 99 parses, all right? So,
all right.
I'm a healer, too, yeah. So my question is, you know, with vanilla, we didn't have the reason why they said, you know, we're going to start at 1.12. We didn't have all the basis information. Obviously, it would take more time, cost a lot more money, but they have a lot of this information for TBC. You know, so I would think it would be pretty cool to say, let's start from a 2.1 standard where, you know, things are how they were at 2.1, the talent systems, this, that, and the other. And I don't know. Maybe play the game as it was at 2.1. Continue, you know, without the bugs, right? Obviously, you know, we don't have the bugs, but like, you know, back when Kara first came out, the gear was, you know, crap, and then like it wasn't crap, but it was, you know, revamped, and then the Kara gear became like really good, and it helped people to catch up in the game. So what you're doing essentially is making the game just a little bit more difficult because, you know, you're playing the game as it was at 2.1. The gear is going to be less powerful. Your talents might be a little bit different. And then, you know, continuing over the time till we get to the 2.4.3, you know, talent base and the gear itemization and stuff like that. I mean, would that be feasible, or is it just going to cost too much money? Or, you know, I don't.
I do think unfortunately, I think it's an unrealistic expectation from the Classic team. I love the idea, like, and that's I think what we all want at the end of the day is just more content, something new to sink our teeth into and try to figure out. And again, like go through that process of breaking down this game and squeezing every little ounce of joy we can out of it, right? And we're still doing that to some extent, but it is a 15-year-old game that we know a ton about, so it's harder to find those kernels, right? But we're still doing a pretty good job, and obviously, with the hardcore stuff, that's been amazing, right? Perfect example of us squeezing even more joy out of this thing. But ultimately, we want, just new stuff. But if you were to talk about what does the retail team want, like the only team at Blizzard that's working on new content, I think they would say they want everyone playing retail and having a blast, right? That would be the answer to that question. Obviously, retail is a long way from what we want from a gaming experience, right? Because we're playing classic. And so that ask is huge for us, right? Because we're not on the same page. But so that's why I fear that it's unrealistic to expect that the only team that's actively working on new stuff is they're working on a game that they want everyone to fall in love with, including us, right? And they want us back in that camp, even though we're like, we're good.
Definitely.
Can you maybe make more for us, right? But it's like I'm sad that they can't recognize what a tremendous market they have right now. And I think this market's over time is going to get more vocal, right, as we go. Because right now we were massively satisfied by Classic coming out. We're pretty satisfied, with each new patch. We're probably going to be pretty excited for TBC when it comes out, for a while. And sedated again, right? And then maybe Wrath, right? Depending, but each new expansion's gonna satisfy us less and less. We're certainly not really gonna be asking for Kata that much. But then after the patches for Wrath kind of dry up, what are we gonna do then, right? When are we gonna start screaming then, right? We're gonna be like, hey, you have this 2 million people or so, let's say, and we're like, how about something for us? We're actually potentially a bigger audience than the audience that you're making a fresh game for. So maybe pay attention to us, right? Like, how about we get a little something, for the effort.
Now this is something that I get. People have been typing this in the chat. People have been asking. They say that Kevin doesn't play that much Classic on stream or something like that. So it's hard to see, know exactly where your head is at, with regard to current Blizzard, current WoW. If you are happy, if you are sad, and a part of me wants to ask, once we get to that line where let's say we go through BC and Wrath, and now it's like what's next? And I've never been a Classic Plus guy, right? I've always I like what you've made already, and I could play this until I am no longer breathing. Like I can find fun ways to enjoy it and just immerse myself, and for all the reasons I said before. But do you have any interest at all in leading or participating or doing any kind of Classic Plus or some sort of addition to this world in that same Classic vein? Because I don't think there'd be anybody else in the world people would want to be doing that, since you basically made the original.
Right. I'm like you. Like, I'd love to see some new content within the Classic philosophies, within the vanilla philosophies, right? And one of the reasons I'm not playing right now, I maxed my Orc Shaman at 60,
Congrats.
but I've never been much of a raider, right? So once I got to 60, I ran some dungeons, but and I was on Fairlina, which I really wanted to be on Fairlina, but it was a mistake for me because I just don't play at that rate. Like, I think that's a hardcore rate server, right? Like, everyone is turboing on that server. So I'd probably have more fun on a slower paced server, but you get a lot of reports from a lot of the servers that a lot of them are full of hardcore raiders, and that's all they do, and meta slaves and that kind of thing. And I know that's not true, but I have yet to find the right server. So, but I also just love games, and so I can't. There's too many games I want to play that are really good that I get distracted, by playing. So, but I do intend to go back and play more Classic as an Alliance character, and then I'll certainly play TBC when it comes out. But to answer the other side of your question, would I be interested in like pushing Classic Plus content? I just can't imagine them reaching out to me. And it would also require a pretty special offer because one of the reasons I left the company was because work and life balance were out of whack. So, I got my 3 girls I got to take care of, and I need a lot of life balance, right? And the industry is not well known for work-life balance. So it would require a pretty special, offer. But and plus, I think one of their finance guys got like a 15 mil signing bonus. So that was a year ago. I feel like I'd had to ask for like a 20 mil. Just I can't.
You deserve it.
You deserve it.
Yeah. But
I just don't know if they'd go for it. But I'd feel weird not asking.
You nailed the head on the whatever the saying is earlier with the trust thing, right? The thing is, I don't, and I think a lot of people don't have the trust in the current, game developers right now to be able to make something
a lot of it
like Classic, and that's the thing is like Kevin, we trusted you guys, and you guys delivered, and it's so different now that I could never trust someone making it unless they brought you back and everyone else back, and to create that magic again,
right?
And that's where it comes down to for me. I don't want them to ruin the legacy that we have.
Right. Yeah, it'd be really interesting. But yeah, it's like I don't think now is the right time to be asking for Classic Plus, if I'm honest. Because if it were like it's just it's a second project for the current retail team to work on. I think the leadership at the very least, like, because I know a fair number of people that are still working on the team that they know some of the old philosophies and they appreciate them, but they may not be in a position to steer the game that way. But the current leadership of retail they're just on a different page, right? So it's not a good time for them to be making the thing that we ultimately want to see. So they might get there, hopefully they're learning a lot from Classic, and they certainly have been using some of the words that we want to hear, which is, we're going to start doing things more like Classic. But I haven't heard very much specifically, outside of Covenants. I haven't heard a lot of things. Like I think Torghast is a giant step towards more of the same, from retail. I think that's going to be a huge disaster. And there's just a fair bit of other things. Like I haven't heard any specifics that are telling me, that they're heading back towards the Classic way, So, we just have to wait and see.
Yeah. I don't know how feasible it is, but what I would really dig a lot is an interview of you with Ian.
Yeah.
That would be...
I cannot imagine he would accept.
Yo, that make that happen.
I can see the title: Kevin Jordan destroys Ian Ascot.
Yeah, we have to go through intermediaries like Preach or something,
Yeah.
Hey, ask Ian this, and then Ian comes back through him. We'll tell Kevin this.
He might be watching right now, dude. He might be watching.
Right. Preach will be our go-between.
So the real elephant in the room for me, Kevin, this is something I've been wondering for 15 years, is
will you marry me?
Who made the lava in Classic WoW? Because that's the one change that I always wished I could change. Because it was like, how the lava is like, it was only a couple. I love the world so much, but it always I saw the lava, and it kind of took me out of my immersion because it was like 2 pixels in multiple and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know, but the water did get a lot better over time, right?
The lava, the water,
the water, yeah,
just water too, but. We struggled with, basically water and lava are essentially the same thing.
It's just one's a lot hotter.
Right. In terms of mechanically or from a programmer standpoint. But I don't remember specifically, but we had a guy, and that's all he did was work on water, and then he went on to work on weather, and that's all he did was weather. So we did have like it's crazy to think about, one programmer being responsible for one thing, for so long on the game, right? But there were a few instances of that. Elevators was another, the boats and elevators, things that move while players aren't,
Oh, I died so many times.
There were still bugs, right? Tons of them, but we had a guy, that's mostly what he did. Like this whole time on WoW was just work on that stuff, right? Like, Tim Truesdale. Yeah, that's he did the water and weather. Yeah, but he's an amazing dude. Super nice.
So I have one more TBC question. I'm sorry to go back to like a serious question or whatever, but I just wanted to say, like, I've been studying the talent systems for TBC in preparation, and how did you bottle lightning twice? I feel like you somehow increased balance, but also increased identity. I don't know how that's possible.
Yeah. It was always just the plan. Like, again, I probably was just unswayed by, like I joke about having survived the class forums, right? Because of all the hate there, but a lot of times I was just unswayed. I just think I had the right amount of ego to know what I wanted to do with it, and I didn't want to turn it into, like just a raid gamer's paradise, right? And a lot of it's interesting because a lot of the questions people ask me are like, did you intend for Shadow Priest to be the PvP spec? Did you intend for Holy to be the raid spec? Did you, like, it's always about intention, like, and I never had intentions in terms of like that kind of stuff. I never intended for you to play any particular way. I never intended for you to sort of solve the puzzle that was in my brain, to be the best at something. My intention was always just to give you lots of cool stuff, lots of cool interactions that were thematically appropriate, made you feel powerful and good and fun, and tied in with all the other things that you were trying to be, as a certain class. And then I left it to you to what you were going to do with it, like. So for me, it was that was the sandbox experience I was creating, was just dumping out a bunch of awesome toys, and then you guys go figure out how to build your masterpiece of gameplay, essentially. So that was always my approach. And I think a lot of designers nowadays just take a different approach. They're like, no, this is going to be the PvP spec. This is going to be the it's going to be the raid spec. This is going to be, once they figure out what I've intended, then they're done, but again, you're taking away the process from the players. And I think that's, it's really damaging to the experience.
I just had a light bulb moment, like like when you were talking right there, it just like a clear Eureka. So, Kevin, one of the biggest
gamers play in the dark. Turn that light bulb.
one of the biggest, like, you saying that is like, Classic is so much about, and vanilla and TBC, you giving us the choices, right? Mm-hmm. It's like here's a piece of paper, you fill in the rest. And retail is so much like, this is what you have to do. And the thing I hate so much about retail, if a new player tries to go into retail WoW, it's like, oh, look, we have this over here. We have this. It's so confusing. It's like, you have to do this. There's the corruption system. There's this system. There's that system. There's this system. Right. You have to do it like this. You have to do it like that. You have to do it like this. Classic WoW is pure. It's simplistic. It's putting the ball in your court.
If you wonder why, like, why is Minecraft so popular, right? It's just Legos online, essentially, right? Like, and you can see parallels in the rest of in other industries, right? Like, back in the day when I played with Legos, it was just a big pile of blocks and they had different colors, right? It's up to me to make whatever. Now you come with all the pieces to make a Star Wars Death Star and a giant book to show you how to do it, right? Yeah. So all you're doing is going through the motions, right? It's like, I love Death Stars too, but I would be way more proud of a Death Star if I made one out of this pile of bricks that, had, where there was no intent, like, that experience is just so much better than it is just kind of doing what you're told and following along, like, again, you end up with an amazing Death Star and that's cool, I guess. But you remember the process, of trying to figure out how to make a Death Star with a pile of bricks a lot better. It's a way more memorable experience. So
So
That's
great.
what I translate into game design.
I've been thinking so much about why I dislike the retail class design, and I know I don't like the rotations and all the procs and all that stuff.
Mhm.
Now you put it like that, it makes so much sense. And
Yeah.
I really hope they, if even for some specs, they go back to original design and let us decide if do I want to play like a rotation,
Mhm.
predefined rotation, then I can probably go fire. But if I want to try it myself, let me try Frost or Arcane, for example, something like that.
Right,
I don't know,
right.
some kind of hybrid style
Yeah.
would be maybe a good idea.
Yeah, I think ultimately, the best game designs for me have always been ones where they meet me halfway. Here are the tools, get creative. It's up to me to get creative and experiment, and that's when I come alive. It challenges a lot of different parts of me, and that's what gets the juices flowing, right?
So
I think
there's a question that's been lingering in the chat. People have been spamming it and making their and fighting for it, and I'm pretty curious about this too. Just to set the record straight here. So, how close are we to vanilla Karazhan in Classic? And just speaking on that whole underground crypt area within Karazhan, was there any plan for that? Maybe there wasn't a plan for it. I'm sure you've answered this a bazillion times, but people are profoundly curious.
Right. Okay, so Karazhan, that was a John Stats thing as well. He was one of the very early team members, and he was on the team before I was, and the team was even pretty small before I was on it. But there's a lot of asset creators that don't always know what they're supposed to be working on. Like sometimes the game design is waiting to flesh out. Sometimes programmers aren't ready with the tools, and so that can like put various content creators like John Stats in a place where they're just like, I don't know what to be doing. I don't have a specific goal, so they just start tinkering. They start making stuff, and that's an example of him just tinkering and making things. And he's trying to come at the problem from the other way. Like the designers are all in their heads. What should a dungeon look like? What should it feel like? How many people should be running around in it? Because we hadn't even designed what the max group size was by then, right? And so that's an important consideration when you think about how big to make a dungeon. How are the hallways? How are the doors? Where the fights take place? Because if there's 10 people in a group versus 3 people in a group, you build it very differently, right? So that was him just kind of experimenting and showing examples of what things could look like and getting us to talk about game design in relation to this is a stairway, this is a hallway, this is a big room for a fight, things like that. So, and some of that stuff gets attached to assets, right, that end up going in the game, and because they look amazing, but don't actually have a specified purpose, right? And then, of course, players find them, right? So, and then, the rumor mills start grinding, start going to work. So I don't know exactly when Karazhan is going to get in there, obviously, because I'm not, part of the project. But Karazhan is a pretty memorable place, pretty special place in a lot of our minds. And I'm excited to see, us be able to dive into there again. But that specific place you're talking about, the Hall of Underground Swimmers or Sinners, Underwater Sinners. What's it called?
Yeah.
The crypts.
Sinners sounds right. Something
Sinners. I think something.
Yeah.
The dead guys are down there, right? Like floating upside down. Or something?
Yeah. Hanging.
That's a reference to Big Trouble in Little China. When they go.
That's right. That's right. I remember. Right. John told us that. Yeah.
So that's what he was just making stuff, and he thought that'd be cool. And
I sorry to keep asking you, but you just brought up another question. Do you feel like retail's got progressively less dark? I feel like Classic had a darkness.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
I was just told by because we were talking about the day-night cycle, and it being 24-hour. That was another big contentious thing on the team, was how long to make the day-night cycle. And Alan Anhab pitched 24-hour because he wanted it to feel like a real world, because again, it's not just it's not just a game you play. This is a place you live, right? You spend a lot of your time here. It should feel like a real world, including, the time of day. So if you get up in the morning to play, you get to see a sunrise, like just like you would. And so again, just everything reinforcing that sense of this is a part of your life, not just a game, right? But it was very contentious. And some of the things people worried about was always playing in the dark, but it was never our intention to diminish gameplay. It was just an artistic difference, right? So the world got very blue, right? So if you go to Duskwood at night, it's very darkish, but it's blue, but you can still see, it's not hard to, it's not like Dark Souls, dark where you have to bring a torch, right? So, but people complained about that apparently, and I think retail eventually removed any change other than the skybox to the lighting.
A lot of like the heavy weather systems as well. Like people were complaining of it, couldn't see in the Rocky Basin, and
I was heartbroken that somebody in my chat told me that.
I know.
I have a very little.
It has gotten lighter, essentially.
I think I remember on New Year that there was fireworks in Stormwind. Is that right, or is it something I wrongly remember?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
Could have been player created for sure. Fireworks in the game.
Kevin, I'm just. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say. I mean, do you have moments? And feel free to just say like, no, I don't have these moments. But is there a lot of stuff that just worked out like really randomly to be like super brilliant? I look at the itemization in Classic WoW. I look at the way defense works, weapon skill works, and how all the items have all these different stats on them. And I just think to myself, did they really have the foresight to feel like 15 years from now people are going to be digesting all these different stat lines in literally 9 million different ways? And look at it makes stat weights for crit and hit, and then like look at doing these weird like Skull of Impending Doom. Like, was that meant to be some low-key sleeper cell green item that was going to be used in like high-level PvP? Like, there's this huge just rain cloud. I mean, all that stuff. I'm just dying to know. Like, or was it the type of thing where you're like, yeah, we planned it all out. Yup.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Sleeper Cell, because if you've ever equipped a Skull of Impending Doom, you've actually sent your banking information directly to me. So,
I knew I was losing money somehow.
And now you're.
You know what, Kevin? You can keep it.
So, some of it was intentional, right? Obviously, there's a ton of emergent, because again, you guys are the greatest content, so you're always going to do things that we never expected. But again, the intent was to give you amazing tools that were super varied, that were experimental for you to find a use for. The item designer during Vanilla, John Yu, would come to me probably once a week and ask me, "Are you sure I'm supposed to be putting all these different attributes on these items? Because it just seems like everyone's going to think my items are trash if you put agility and spirit on them." I'm like, yeah, do it. But he would question it all, and he was kind of a hardcore gamer, right? So he had that sort of like, oh man, I feel really bad about this, right? And sure enough, a lot of people called a fair number of his items total trash, right? But at the end of the day, what it created was this huge textured canvas for you guys to dive in and either find a use for, or discard as garbage, or find out as best in slot, or whatever it was, like the whole range,
Wow.
And again, that's part of the process of you guys getting your hands dirty, rolling up your sleeves, right? And putting in the work to tell us what's good and what's bad. It's just up to us to provide you a big enough canvas, right? And so nowadays, like, everything's so optimized that it's like they're trying to limit those responses of this item's trash, but they've also removed you from the process, because it's like, yeah, this item is automatically changing attributes depending on the deck I'm playing, and there's like no bad items, therefore there's really no good items, because they're all the same. If it's got a higher item score, just equip it. You're probably right.
Yeah.
So again, the intent was just to give you a play space that was huge and experimental, and let you guys, figure out how to do it.
That is amazing to hear. I mean, I hoped it was the case that you would say that, right? Because it's the type of thing that you guys didn't know exactly what you were creating potentially. Like, you came up with all this cool stuff and you were like, let's let the players figure it out. And the most amazing thing is, like I said before, this game hasn't crumbled under the weight of 15 years of technology. Like, it still holds up. It still has a backbone. I mean, we've done everything. We've done our damnedest to break it, you know, and I think the thing that breaks it more than anything else, just my personal opinion, is the whole multi-boxing thing. It makes me feel like you have multiple lives, you know, like, but you know, just the mage farms, like, that stuff can come close to kind of breaking it, but it doesn't fully snap the spine of the world of this 15-year-old game where you created all of these random things. The game still has integrity, and it's still the most glorious sandbox I've ever seen, and now we're making our own fun with it and all this type of stuff, so it just blows me away.
You want to hear the dark side of this whole thing? Is that John Yu was actually replaced in his position because people thought internally that he did a bad job with the items, because he was doing what I told him to do, essentially, which is to make these crazy items that are sometimes bad and sometimes good, right?
Oh, man.
It's crazy to think, like, he is an unsung hero, right?
He is.
Classic WoW, right? Of vanilla WoW, because people didn't appreciate the fact that, you know, he made items so amazing, and it's like, now we appreciate it, but at the time, like many of the people playing the game, they were like, who would make this item? This item is garbage, right? Not understanding the bigger picture, right? Of, it's important that there are bad items so that it can create a variance between good and bad, right? So pretty rough, you know.
I think
so.
I just wanted to take a moment, Melderon, just like you know, 20 years ago, a group of guys came together with a single vision, right, to create this MMO. And, you know, you had
single vision.
Well, you know what I mean, to have this vision to create this MMO. You know, 20 years ago, you had people, you know, like yourself, Kevin, you know, working together, doing these things, like, you know, like you said, you know, you have, you know, each individual person working on these, you know, on the classes, on the items, and all these little things came together just absolutely perfectly. The magic of what you guys created, for me, the best game of all time. I have never, the only thing I can come close to is, like, you know, that first time when I ever, you know, no other game, I let me just say this. I match up every other game to WoW. Nothing ever comes close, right? I always come back to WoW. I always come back to Classic. I always come back to this. What you guys did and how you did this, it's still just, it boggles my mind. I just want to take a second to say, like, how absolutely amazed and just thankful I am that you guys did this. Changed so many of our lives. And it's just, it's to put yourself back there 20 years ago. Like, I wish I could just be a fly on the wall and just see some of that, what you guys did. I mean, did you guys have any idea that this was going to be like this huge, amazing, you know, game? Or like, were you guys like, it's just, I can't even like fathom. I mean, like what it was to be a part of it.
Is Defcamp gushing a little bit? Is it just me? Anyone else gushing? I'm good.
He's gushing for sure.
I am. I'm just.
We always play this ambience in the background, Kevin. We always play, like, whenever we do these GMAs, we just play these zones. But it's hitting different today for me, because the person who played just such a gigantic role in making what I'm literally seeing behind you is just sitting. I mean, being able to put the pieces together it's touching, man.
Yeah. To talk about some more of the unsung heroes, right? Like I mentioned John Yu, and but you're right in that, like, I know we tend to think there's one person responsible, right? A lot of times for things, right? Like every time something goes bad with retail, it's like, oh, that Ian, you know, like we blame him, and if something goes right, you know, like, and so obviously I'm here and I'm taking a lot of the brunt of, not the brunt, but I'm taking a lot of the praise, but I want to diffuse it a little bit because, like you said, an amazing team came together at a perfect time in Blizzard's history. And there was so much about that environment and the people involved. And it was a perfect storm in the sense of, you know, Mike Morheim worked to create an environment that was built around being a design-led company, right? Which a lot of companies are not design-led, but Blizzard was back in the day. A lot of people worry about, suits being in charge, the money men, the bean counters, right? And they're responsible for all the crappy decisions. But I can tell you, it was a game design led company back then, right? Which is a tremendous accomplishment, from Mike Morheim. Alan Adham created an environment where each of us felt like we were participating, right? So everyone on the team and a lot of people at the company got their say, and we didn't always agree and we didn't always implement, but people felt like they could contribute, and there were no bad ideas, right? Like in terms of just speak up, right? Like obviously there were bad ideas in reality, but speak up, right? Like another thing that Alan Adham did was he kept us all focused on the job at hand and not worrying about things. He used to get us. He used to talk to the money men and get us retention bonuses before the game was out, so that we wouldn't consider leaving, right? While we were in this long stretch of years and years of not making any money from the game we were working on, right? He would get us retention bonuses before the game came out, right? Which is kind of unheard of, right? When you think about today's marketplace, right? So he went and convinced people, that we should be paid money before our thing came out. So, there's just so many things that came together so perfectly. And there's so many amazing people involved in this project, right? And I was a part of that, right? But I'm still kind of amazed as well as the number of people that got pulled into this project in such an amazing way, and in the environment that allowed for all this amazing creativity to come forward. And it wasn't always the best of times, that we had a lot of low morale moments on the team, but we got through it. And and I'll never forget, and I'll always believe this accomplishment was pretty amazing. So I appreciate you guys saying that. And I feel it the same way in a lot of the ways you do. So thank you.
Can't thank you enough.
Yeah, I'm not a very religious person, but I do feel like that, we're all put here. Either we've created our self purpose, or that purpose is given to us by something. But I think that, for you, like you said, you have family, you're a husband and a father, and, that's purpose. But, and I think another purpose is this game, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess my question to you is, have you ever thought about getting back on the horse? Right. Would you ever do this again? Because, not to say the world needs you, Kevin, but the world needs you, Kevin. It's one of those things.
But the legacy will always be there. Is what is?
It will always be there. But but Kevin brought up a good point earlier. Like, what happens after Wrath?
So obviously, under the right circumstances, I would absolutely get back on the horse. It's tricky, though. It's obviously tricky with the game industry the way it is, not only from a financial standpoint, market standpoint, but also just the genre. The industry right now is struggling to be creative. We're all doing kind of the safe bets, across the industry. Oh, another battle royale,
Mm-hmm.
We're doing a lot of that kind of design, right? So it'll swing back. The pendulum will definitely swing back. You can see that from Ashes of Creation. They're trying to push the pendulum back by doing wild things, right?
Yeah.
And that's good. That's good for the whole industry to see, different things. But that's also another thing I try to do with my Twitch channel is just influence, game design and game philosophy and game theory. That's one of the reasons I'm here today, right? Is some of you guys, I want to say you guys have learned a few things about how we thought about things back in the day, right?
Absolutely.
And you guys have been students of this game for 15 years. And yet some of this stuff is wow, I never thought of it like that before, right? And so it's also kind of one of those sad things when I joked earlier about not writing this stuff down. Design philosophy is one of those really tricky things, it turns out. Because for me, it was if someone were to look at WoW and why it was successful, and they were a game designer, I would expect them to be able to pick it apart and say, well, this is why. But it turns out that's a much harder job than I imagined it would be. Whereas if you look at the art, a new artist comes into the World of Warcraft team, and he says, well, how do you do things around here? And you say, well, go look at the game. right? The game is a living embodiment of how we do things around here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the design is harder to. You can't just say, "Well, go play the game, and you'll see how we do things around here." You know, like it's way more nuanced than that. And I'm probably underselling the craftsmanship that goes into art, you know, but I feel like you understand the style, you understand the artistic qualities and the approaches you take with the art a lot more readily than you do the design philosophy and the design strategy and all the things, right? So that's what I joke about. I'm sad I didn't write it down, but that's what I'm kind of doing with my channel. That's what I'm kind of trying to do here is expose some of the reasons and the whys of how we got World of Warcraft to the place it was and why some of the things work so well. Like, again, the talk about the factions, you know, and people's sense of identity connecting to Alliance versus Horde. That's a real thing that happened. And some of that was unexpected, right? Like, naturally, I knew that people would love to have someone to smash, right? But beyond that, like, I never expected nerds to put their stickers of their nerddom on their cars, you know? Like, are you kidding me? Like, you would out yourself like that? You're a gamer, you know? Like, so obviously some other stuff, you know, came to the fore, right? And it surprised me, but yeah, it's but yeah, I wish, like, I feel like there's a disconnect, you know, between the conversations we were having back in the day, you know, internally, and why people think WoW was a success, you know, because it's not just about a brilliant raid game, you know, it's not just about item score progression, right? That's just scratching the surface. That's what every other game does, you know, and you don't care about those other games, even though they have raid progression and item score going up. And you have to get into why. Why do you guys care about this game versus every other game that offers those things? And so those are the questions. And I have some of the answers, but I wish the reasons were more widely known.
But the fact that you still stream and that what you're doing, and like, you don't see many developers, you know, whether they're past developers, present, whatever, streaming. Right. And like, you know, I think that is what you're doing there is exactly what we need to, is like, you're bringing this out in the open. You're putting yourself available so that we can talk to you. And right. I mean, I got to thank you again for that. 'Cause like, you know, you don't see many developers doing that, like, at all. And
there are some,
there are some, but it's
books, like, you know, I love books like John Statt's book that kind of exposes, and like, it's another thing. It's just amazing to read. Like, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I get to do it from the safety of not currently being on a project that you guys love. Like, the conversation would be so different if I were currently working at Blizzard, right? Like,
exactly.
And we talked earlier about, you know, the distance between community and developer, right? Like, this is the safe way to do it, right? But it can be harmful when it's actually for real on a person that's working on a live game.
The trust has been severed between player and Blizzard for a lot of people, but I mean, I do think it'd be a good look if they, you know, hired back one of the OGs. I mean, not to say. Right. I'm happy with what we have right now. I mean, whether it's private server or real classic, like, the world you created is absolutely, like, you know, breathtaking. I can play it forever.
Right.
So, guys, do you guys have one final question each? Perhaps we've been taking up so much of this man's time. Defcamp, Dune, Melderon. I know people in the chat are dying to hear your TLDR thoughts on Ashes of Creation. That's something that I'm not personally looking forward to that much. So I'm not trying to, like, lead the passer here. Like, that's something that I saw and I was kind of like, meh. But
well, I can answer that one quickly with just steering people to my YouTube channel.
Yes, please.
I made a whole video about Ashes of Creation. It's about an hour and a half, and I reviewed or reacted to Lazy Peon's video about Ashes of Creation. So there's your TLDR.
Okay.
And this Twitch is
good. Watch it. It's really nice.
The Twitch is Kevin Jordan. Make sure to check that out too. Sorry. Yeah.
I don't really have a question anymore. All I can say is this has been the most amazing GMA or interview or whatever we ever had or I ever had. It's amazing to think that we actually just talked with someone who was one of the original designers of the game we talk about and play for so long.
The sausage maker.
That in itself is amazing. So all I want to say really is just thank you for making this game.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you very much for reaching out, Dunedain. Yeah, I would have never.
Yeah, I'm so
here
happy.
if not for you. Yeah.
I know. Thank you, Dunedain. I too would like to trade in my question for a thank you, Kevin. I gotta say that I first and foremost, like I don't think I can put into words how much of what you've done has not only helped me with my addiction and with my, becoming a person, but this game means more to me than just a video game, right? It's a way of life. It's a lifestyle. It is, how I make a living. I'm a streamer as well. And I can't believe that I'm actually able to sit here and speak with you and able to tell you, just say, thank you for what you did. I mean, you created these classes and parts of this game that I have fallen in love with, and has helped me find out more about myself as a person. That's a gift that I couldn't imagine, being able to give someone else. So from the deepest part of my heart, man, 100%, thank you so much. Seriously.
Yeah, I have to respond to that. I obviously I appreciate it a tremendous amount, but you asked about a copy of that email that I sent, to Alan Adham about PvP, right? So here's the part that is relevant to your situation, that and it's why it's so touching to me that you shared that part of your your experience with WoW, is because in the quote that I threw out from Fight Club that I threw out in that document was how much can you know about yourself? You've never been in a fight, right? And it was trying to support this idea that PvP should be part of the game, right? But I went on to also express in this document that when just the concept that when you're in a fight, you learn about yourself, right? And learning about yourself leads to personal growth. And personal growth is one of the most addicting things that people can ever experience, right? If you've ever felt, right, that sense of personal growth, it's there's so much elation, right? You're like, oh my gosh, how do I get more of that, right? Like when you notice yourself growing as a person, right? And so, and I spoke about how that should be the goal, one of the goals of our game. I know, because I even wrote, I know it's entertainment, but first, but the idea that it could also teach people about themselves and help them grow personally, right? That's where we have them. That's where we have them in terms of like, they are going to love this product because through socialization and through a lot of other things going on in the game, right? They're going to grow as human beings, right? And that's going to be more valuable than any set of gear or any boss kill, or whatever it is, right? It's that secondary effect of we got through this personally, we got through this as a group, we got through this as a guild, whatever it is, right? And so it's very gratifying for me to hear basically the end result of that, thing that I postulated so many years ago. And like, because you're the exact example of what I was talking about, right? And so thank you very much for bringing this full circle, right?
Oh, man.
And I know you don't speak just for yourself. I know there's a lot of people that are out there in the same way. So, but it's very gratifying to hear. So thank you.
That means so much to hear that, Kevin. Thank you so much. Really.
I'm just going to ask you this question, Kevin. So if this didn't work out, game design, what was your other? Did you have any other passions in life?
It's so funny. Well, first I wanted to be a professional soccer player. That didn't work out. I was actually a bartender for 6 years before I became a game designer, or before I went to work for Blizzard. I was a bartender, and I ended that one of my gigs, and Pat Nagel, who was my roommate and has been my friend since 6th grade, said, why don't you come work for Blizzard? You know enough about computers, you can work tech support, right? And so I got a job working tech support. And then a year or so after that, I got a chance to be on the WoW team, and I took it. And I didn't even realize I could make a career as a game designer, right? And I think to this day, a lot of people don't think that. And sadly, the industry isn't looking for pure game designers very much anymore. But I always assumed I'd have to be able to program or be an artist or, whatever it is. And so, thanks to me being unemployed at the time, thanks to Pat Nagel for the suggestion, I ended up in a place where it's like my career path became sort of accidentally awesome, right? And I was able to make a career out of it. So I very much kind of stumbled into it. And yeah, it's been an amazing ride. I've been so fortunate.
Well, we're glad you stumbled in it, and we're glad
right?
for, Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go back to bartending. You never know.
There you go.
I don't know if you guys are big drinkers or not.
Yeah. Maybe you can totally change the meta on drinking, too.
Yeah.
Just like
As long as you make a drink called the Staff of Jordan, there you go.
Yeah, first round's on me. That's all I'm saying.
Nice. Kargoz, what do you got?
Yo, so Kevin, we love your game, man, and we're trying to like kind of defend it to a certain extent because it's not all on Blizzard too. At the same time, like the community, if the community is kind of toxic or mean spirited or whatever, like they're just not going to be happy or whatever. So like recently with the hardcore game, the game mode, it's just everything has felt so right. And interpreting this creation of yours, through the lens of this hardcore lens, has really just made so much sense across every aspect. And I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. 95% of ideas end up in disaster, but this is one of the few types of things where everything. It just feels good. It's fun to watch, fun to play, and I was hoping maybe one day you would give it a shot, maybe because it'd just be so interesting to see like what the creator of this universe, like their thoughts on it, as if they're trying to play through that game mode.
I love survival games, so it does sound very close to what I would want. It's so funny. I'll tell you another quick story about hardcore modes or one life modes. As a customer service person, I was in tech support, and I was doing tech support for Diablo 2, which had a hardcore. And I got invited to a meeting on whether or not hardcore mode was something that we should do in a game. And it was back and forth, right? Like they were still trying to decide whether or not it was a good thing. And I argued against it, believe it or not, because I said every experience ends in horror, right? And then they're on the phone and they're calling me and they're yelling at me because there was some bug or lag or whatever it was. It's rarely because you screwed up, right? Especially in your own mind. And so I argued against it because I was like, why would you want a gaming experience to always end badly, right? And I've never been so wrong, right? And I didn't realize it at the time, but what it did was it makes every experience up to that point way more amazing, right? So even though it probably ends horribly, every experience is a lot weightier and a lot more powerful because of that, fear, because of that tension, And so I still think it was correct not to have the mode, at least in the way you're thinking, probably, in WoW, because WoW there's so much permanence, to WoW. Like Defcamp was talking about not wanting to play on private servers because he doesn't want his character to be wiped, there's a lot of that, in WoW, and it makes the loftier, goals, what's the right word? It means you can have loftier goals and you can implement more challenge. Because the downside for me from hardcore is I'm going to play safe the whole time, right? That's my worry. Because when I play WoW, I play crazy. Like I'll just do things, and try to push my challenge level all the time. Because the last thing I want to do is get complacent in a game where I feel like, I'm just pushing buttons and everything's dying, right? So my worry is always that people don't push themselves. They waiting to do a dungeon until they're way over geared or way over leveled for it, or because they don't want any chance of dying. So it does sound really intriguing, but it's one of those things I have to manage, like how safe I play, and try to still push myself. So I try to find the right way to push myself, so I'm still having a great time and there's still that fear in my belly,
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I mean, we're not, any one of us here are not exactly big streamers or anything. So, you coming on this podcast too, it's like you're getting in the trenches with the community and just, being 100% transparent and real with
you guys
everybody.
are huge in my heart, let me tell you.
Yeah, as you are, the feeling is mutual, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, guys. If you like anything that any of us do, please, as a personal favor to all of us, could you please, follow him on Twitch and YouTube and give some support.
Let's post them again. His Twitch and YouTube. Yeah.
And what are your plans moving forward, Kevin, with your Twitch channel and YouTube channel? You kind of just going with the flow, or do you have any kind of shows on there or things like that for the people to think of?
Yeah, so mostly I just play games, and then we talk about a lot of game design. No day goes by where I don't get WoW questions. But we just kind of hang out. It's super chill. I play games that I enjoy. And then, we talk about the game design and why I think things work and don't. So a lot of what we've been talking about here, just kind of day to day. Yeah. But I love all kinds of different games, always have. So I have trouble, especially lately, getting into a rut where I play just one thing. So you'll see me play a wide variety. And a lot of people love that you're just kind of a one-game person, right? So unfortunately, that's not me. But yeah, lately I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV, but before that I was playing Escape from Tarkov like crazy. I played Crusader Kings 3 the other night.
Oh, nice.
Prison Architect, we have some fun. So, and I try to include my viewers anytime I play games that allow for it. So, but just chilling. I'll be playing Shadowlands when it comes out. All my fingers and toes crossed. But not expecting much. But we'll see.
We'll see exactly.
And then, then TBC, and then I do intend to level an alliance character to max at some point, and potentially it'd be a hardcore character. And
oh
you guys
my god!
So,
please,
I'd love to see that.
I'll have to think about it.
That would be the ultimate. You love to see it.
Everybody's gonna host you and go crazy, man. If we get to see the original architect of the game play, a playthrough to 60 on hardcore. God.
All right, to 60. You have a lot of faith in me.
Oh yeah, you got to see this. Oh man,
die in level 3. Frostmane Hole. Look
out. Stay out of the cave. That's what you just stay out of the cave. Yeah.
But that's where you find all your friends. They're in the cave.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're gonna end the stream now. I'm gonna pass you off to Grace for days. He's off to some hardcore. I'm going to be playing hardcore later today. I'm not sure if Defcamp and all them are, but
I'm not. I'm taking today off after this. I need to break. Yeah, I need to take all this in. You know?
Same here. But thank you so much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. One more round of applause, please, for Kevin. Please follow him. Please support. I mean, he's
very nice.
Done so much.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute honor.
It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. All right, take care, everyone. I'm going to pass you off to Grace.